Hi, I'm Charles with AniCap. The story begins as a guy wakes up and is surprised to see that his hands are really small. He goes to look at his surroundings and finds that he's in some sort of giant kingdom. Just then a maid rushes to him because she's worried that he'll fall out the window. This kid's name is Vaughn, and he apologizes. The scenery outside was just too magnificent, and he was overwhelmed by its beauty. The maid is shocked to hear him speak like this, and she wonders where he learned such difficult words. She points out that he's only 2 years old, and this comes as a surprise to Vaughn. He's actually much older, so he wonders what's going on. He has vague memories of living in this place, so he wonders if this is that thing called reincarnation. Vaughn remembers that this maid is named Till, and his name is Von Nefertio. His father is Marquise, and his older brothers are Mercia, Jard, and Sesto. Till is very impressed by his ability to say all their full names at his age, but Vaughn just wants to know where he is right now. As the entire family enjoys breakfast, we see that everyone is very tense and serious. Vaughn, on the other hand, isn't anything like his brothers, and the maids all think he's adorable. He is eating his vegetables like a good boy, and the maids compliment him for being so good at chewing his food. They absolutely adore him, so Vaughn feels like he's a VIP at some kind of hostess club. Vaughn then puts all the jokes aside to review his current situation. It seems that he's been reborn in this new world, but his memories of his time in Japan are still intact. Just then we see just how serious Marquise is as he asks Jard what he will be studying today. Jard immediately responds by saying that he will be learning about fire magic and battle formations. Marquise has the same question for Sesto, so Sesto responds that he will be studying magic. Marquise then turns to Vaughn to hear what he will be doing, but his answer is a bit different. Vaughn explains that there are a lot of things he doesn't know, so he was thinking of starting by studying their nation's culture and history. This instantly shocks all of his brothers, and Marquise can't help but laugh. He thought that he had been spoiling Vaughn since he was the last child of his late wife Mura, but he's happy to see that at just 2 years old, Vaughn is already a fine young man. Marquise is very pleased with his growth, and he's positive that Vaughn will possess powerful fire magic like Mira and himself. Marquise says that the family's future is in good hands, and he looks forward to Vaughn's magical aptitude appraisal when he turns 8. Marquise then gets very serious and declares that he has high hopes for Vaughn. Vaughn then thinks about how apparently a person's magical aptitude is very important in this world. Their offensive capabilities make them useful for protecting people, so nobles desire one of the 4 elemental magics. These 4 are fire, water, wind, and earth. Those with aptitude for other types of magic that don't fit into those 4 are seen as a disgrace. As for his family, Marquise and all of Vaughn's brothers possess one of the 4 elemental magics. A while later we see that Vaughn has really taken an interest in this nation's culture during his studying. He is looking at a map, and he wonders if a nearby port is the only one where ships can sail from. Till says it is, because huge monsters lurk in the deep ocean, and the ships would come under attack if they sailed from anywhere else. Vaughn can't get enough of this new information, so he wonders what kind of races exist in this world. Till begins to list all the different kinds, like elves and dwarves, but she's interrupted by the other maids. They point out that this is all too complicated for a 2-year-old to learn, so Till apologizes. Vaughn tells her that it's no problem, and he was asking her because he wants to learn everything he can. He has become interested in something else, so he asks Till to teach him about magic tools. Till begins by explaining that magic crystals, gemstones, plus some rocks and ores can all store magic. Because of this, people can make magic tools related to their magic aptitude with them. The maids are amazed to see Vaughn absorbing all this information because he's still just 2 years old. Just then, their little lesson is interrupted by the butler named Esparta. Esparta acknowledges that Vaughn is currently 2 years old and is learning to read and do basic numeracy. That isn't enough for Esparta though, as he wants to find out exactly how much Vaughn really knows. Vaughn takes a look at this guy and thinks about how Esparta is a talented butler who has apparently been in his father's services for many years. This guy seems pretty dependable, but Vaughn can't help but think about how he can be really scary sometimes. Vaughn quietly says that his reading isn't so good, so Esparta wants to hear about his numeracy skills. Again, Vaughn speaks softly and explains that he can do a little addition and subtraction. Esparta doesn't waste any time, and he gives him a quick test. He raises a few of his fingers and instructs Vaughn to tell him how many fingers he's holding up. Vaughn correctly counts 5 of them, and everyone patiently waits to see what Esparta says. Esparta then declares that he will become Vaughn's tutor, and Vaughn is horrified. The lessons begin immediately, but they're absolutely brutal. Esparta never takes it easy on Vaughn, but thanks to these tough lessons, Vaughn is able to learn how to read and write in just a few weeks. Vaughn often wonders if this kind of studying is even okay for a 2-year-old, but it eventually helps him to learn a lot of stuff. Vaughn then spent the next 2 years studying from dawn to dusk, and eventually he turned 4 years old. We now see him training swordsmanship with Till, but he's no match for her. Till wins like she always does, but Vaughn has had enough of her taunting him. The other maids scold her, as they point out that Till must not value her life for her to be taunting Lord Vaughn like that. They insist that Vaughn punish her, but Vaughn says that he doesn't mind how she treats him. The other maids refuse to accept that, because normally it would be a serious crime for someone to be so rude to a noble. Vaughn acknowledges that this is just one of those obligations he has as a noble, so he prepares to punish Till for her insolence. Till screams in terror as she gets ready, but Vaughn just ends up flicking her in the head. The other maids implore him to do more, but Vaughn declares that the matter is settled. Till can't believe that he spared her, and Vaughn just gives her a reassuring smile. Vaughn then studied swordsmanship every single day, and by the time he was 5, he was able to fight on equal terms with the older soldiers in training. As Vaughn spars with one, he thinks about the fighting style of his opponents. He usually fights other children, so their attacks tend to be simplistic. Vaughn's experience from his past life makes a huge difference, so he's able to beat the soldiers in training easily. After demolishing the kid he was just sparring with, the other trainees say that Lord Vaughn is really amazing. They can't believe that Vaughn is really good with the sword, on top of all his other talents, and they call him a real prodigy. Vaughn is also very kind-hearted, as he helps the kid up. This amazes the others as well, because unlike Jard and Sesto, Vaughn talks to them, despite their lower status. As Vaughn takes a break, he is met by the deputy commander, named D. D takes a look at Vaughn's hands, and he's amazed, because Vaughn doesn't have any calluses. He thought that Vaughn was sword training every night, so he expected his hands to be in rougher shape, but that is not the case. Vaughn explains that he can't train his swordsmanship as much as he wants, because his studies take up all of his time. D then reveals that Vaughn has been studying so much because Esparta was ordered to make Vaughn study 3 times harder than anyone else. Vaughn is shocked because he had no idea, but it all makes sense now. He thought it was odd that he was the only one studying from morning to night, and now he knows why. D assumes that Vaughn would rather be learning about the sword, so he says that if he wants to train more, then he will plead his case for him. He calls Sparta an egghead, and he says that the egghead is too devoted to academic subjects. D doesn't want that for Vaughn, so he declares that he should pursue the path of the sword instead. He vows to teach Vaughn everything he knows so that he can become the nation's greatest swordsman. This guy's way over the top with everything he says, but the look in his eyes tells Vaughn that he is dead serious. Vaughn settles him down by explaining that while he does like the sword, he also likes studying. There's only so much time in the day, but Vaughn vows to do his best to do both. D accepts his decision and says that at the very least, he will instruct Vaughn personally for his sword lessons. Vaughn is intimidated by this guy's determination, so he tells D to just go easy on him with the training. D assures him that he will, as he says that he hasn't forgotten that Vaughn is still a kid. D is really eager to teach him some fighting, so something tells Vaughn that the sword training will be pretty intense. Vaughn ends up being right, as D's training has Vaughn swinging his sword hundreds of times. He tells Vaughn to do 100 upswings and 100 mid-sweeps over and over again. The training is absolutely relentless, and it seems to never end. Eventually, Vaughn finds a moment to catch his breath, and he can't help but call D a demon. D isn't done though, as he notices that Vaughn isn't really doing anything on his break. He can't have that, so he tells Vaughn that he should rest in a squatting position instead of using a chair. D is getting pretty crazy, so Vaughn thinks that he might not be a demon after all, and he might just be an idiot. Just then Till arrives to give our hero a towel. Vaughn acknowledges that his life has been pretty rough, but every day has been fun since he was reincarnated. As he looks at the people around him, Vaughn says that he feels a satisfaction that he never experienced in his past life. Vaughn doesn't want to take any of this for granted, so he determines that he must enjoy this fun life he has in this world to the fullest. A while later, Vaughn goes over what has happened so far. After being reincarnated, he became regarded as a prodigy by the time he was 6. Every day he went through his grueling studies and swordplay training. One day, Von's body even gives out mid-studying, and Till says that he seems really worn out. It has been the same thing day after day, and it's getting to be too much for him. Von realized that at this rate, he was never going to get to enjoy his new life. That is why he now tells Till that he wants to go outside and play. She wonders if there's anywhere he would like to go, so Von thinks it over. He eventually decides to go to the market, so they head there immediately. While there, Von thinks about how he isn't exactly on good terms with his brothers. They're all very competitive because whoever ends up being the strongest among them will take over as the head of the family. Von knows that he has to be careful because if he stands out too much as a prodigy, his brothers might try to end his life. If things keep going the way they are, Von knows that he won't be able to enjoy his life in peace. That is why Von has decided to become a slacker so he can be a normal child instead of a prodigy. Von now enjoys himself as he notices that there's so much activity in the market. It's the biggest market in the city, and it's right next to the Chamber of Commerce. This company is huge, and it has branches all over the kingdom. Just then, Von hears a loud noise in the distance, and he sees that it's coming from someone yelling at a tied-up kid. The guy tells everyone to stop looking at them because he isn't putting on a show, and he is shocked when Von's guards prepare themselves. Von stops them, and he asks the man why the boy he's with is tied up. The man explains that this boy is his son, and he can do whatever he wants with him. Von is startled by this answer, and the man explains that he is here to sell his son into slavery. This confuses Von, so Till explains how things are here. For a long time now, poor families have sold children they can't feed into slavery to earn money to live on. Von thinks about how appalling this is, and he wonders what he can do. Just then, some woman comes out of nowhere, and she wonders if Von is the youngest son of Marquise. Till confirms that he's the young prodigy, and she even shows the woman his family crest. The woman is delighted because everyone has been talking about Von, and she welcomes him to the Chamber of Commerce. Her name is Rosalie, and she says that they have everything Von could ever want inside this place. Von immediately points to the kid, and he explains that he's going to be sold into slavery. Von wants to know how much he will go for, so Rosalie takes a look at him. She wonders if the kid has any magical aptitude, so the man explains that he's capable of using thieving magic. That's not very valuable, so Rosalie explains that they wouldn't pay any higher than 3 large silvers for him. Unfortunately, this makes the man furious, and he takes his anger out on his son. He says that he is worthless, and he calls his son a useless brat. The man drags him away as he plans to try and sell him at a different shop, but he is stopped in his tracks. A voice comes out of nowhere saying that he will purchase the boy, and everyone is shocked to see that it's Von. The man is taken aback as Von offers to buy him for 5 silver, and Von instructs Till to get the money. They pay the man the 5 silver, and the guy doesn't even hesitate to leave his son behind. Von wonders if the kid is okay, but the kid doesn't even say a single word. Von removes the rope that was tying him up, and the kid snaps out of his shock. Von introduces himself, and the kid reveals that his name is Kamson. Von happily explains to him that he's free now, so he can go anywhere he wants. Till is surprised because she thought Von bought him to be a slave, but that isn't it at all. Von just felt like he needed to help the kid, so that is what he did. He wonders if Kamson has anywhere to go, but once again he goes silent. Von can tell that he doesn't, so he asks him if he would like to come with them. Von's guards see a problem with this because they doubt that Marquise will allow a child of unknown origin into the mansion. It would be different if Von brought him back as a slave, so Von determines that he has no other choice. He wonders if that would be okay with Kamson, and Kamson says that he doesn't mind. That's fantastic news, so Von says that it's time to find him some proper clothes. Von realizes that he isn't the best at this, so he asks Rosalie if she will help them. Rosalie's happy to have their business, but first she says that they should finalize the slave contract. She then takes both of their hands and begins the process. This puts a seal on both their hands, and it acts as their slave contract. It cannot be removed, and the seal will remain as long as the contract isn't nullified. Rosalie says that she will waive the contract fee because this is their first time doing business with each other, so Von thanks her. Rosalie is stunned for a moment, but she remembers that it's time for work. As she runs to get started, Rosalie can't believe that she was actually thanked by a noble. Von is glad to finally have everything settled, so he takes Kamson to get fixed up. A while later, we see that Campson looks like a different person as he informs Vaughn that Dee is looking for him. Vaughn offers to give Campson a cookie if he tells Dee that he isn't here, but Campson points out that Dee already knows he's here. Campson feasts on the cookie anyway, and Vaughn wonders where his gloves are. Campson explains that he doesn't need them, but Vaughn wonders if he's really okay with showing his slave seal. Campson isn't just okay with it, he's actually proud of the seal. He declares that it symbolizes his friendship with Vaughn, so he likes to show it off. Vaughn points out that he bought those gloves for him, so Campson throws everything he just said out the window and he puts the gloves on. Just then, Dee arrives in search of Vaughn, but Campson tells him that Vaughn isn't here. Dee says that someone saw Vaughn come into this room, but Campson says that he must be mistaken. Campson declares that he can't be sure, but he believes that the person just hallucinated because of their strong feelings for Vaughn. Dee's investigation isn't done, as he notices the cookie crumbs on Campson's face that were not there before. Campson denies that they were ever there, but Dee saw him wipe them away. Dee is done with the games, as he determines that Vaughn must have bribed Campson to lie. Dee's impressed by Campson's boldness for lying right to his face, so he decides that he will train Campson in Vaughn's place. Campson can't believe it, but there's nothing he can do, as Dee takes him to begin their sword training. Vaughn sees that it's safe to come out, and he can only apologize to Campson for letting him take the fall. A while later, we see that the entire kingdom is talking about Vaughn. He has finally turned 8 years old, which means it's time to appraise his magical aptitude. All of his brothers have an aptitude for either fire or wind magic, and everyone is sure that Vaughn will possess fire magic. Everyone's looking forward to seeing Vaughn's results, and they all hope the best for him because he's so nice to everyone. Unfortunately, the story takes a very dark turn as Marquise hears about the results of Vaughn's aptitude test. It reveals that Vaughn has no aptitude for any of the 4 elemental magics, and Marquise is furious. The news gets even worse as Marquise is told that Vaughn's aptitude is actually for production magic. Vaughn is terrified by his father's reaction, and tension begins to fill the entire room. This is the worst possible outcome, as Marquise explains that production magic is known as the most unfortunate type of all. It allows its user to create swords and accessories by preparing materials and visualizing the result in their mind. The problem is that it consumes a lot of mana, and those things can be produced without magic anyway, so production magic is practically useless. Besides that, Marquise wonders how Vaughn is supposed to protect the people of this nation with that kind of magic. Marquise says that his late wife Mira was a powerful fire mage, and so was he. Their power was passed down to their other sons, so Marquise can only wonder how he and his wife gave birth to a useless production mage. Vaughn is the last child Mira left him before her passing, so Marquise is furious. He has a terrifying moment of clarity as he realizes that he was a fool for getting his hopes up. Vaughn displayed some very rare talents despite his young age, so Marquise let himself think that Vaughn would become something more. It's clear now that he was wrong, and Marquise can't believe that his house produced such a disgraceful failure. Marquise has taken hold of his sword, so Vaughn realizes just how dangerous this situation is. His father only cares about the strength of their family, so Vaughn begins to panic as he can tell that his father is prepared to end his life. Marquise realizes what he must do, so he raises his sword before his son. Vaughn can only watch in horror as he's completely defenseless, and he desperately tries to think of a way out of this. Just then, before Marquise can strike him down, Mercia steps in to stop him. Marquise demands to know what the meaning of this is, so Mercia explains that he has an idea. There is a remote village that remains undeveloped due to its location, but it's still part of their domain. Mercia has a plan for this place, so he suggests that they leave the area to Vaughn. Marquise knows about this nameless village, but he wonders why Mercia thinks that this is a good idea. Mercia begins his explanation by saying that the village has just over 100 residents. Nothing special ever comes out of there, but the magical resources in the nearby mountains are very powerful. This village is part of the territory that Marquise gained when he was promoted, but it sits between 2 countries that are at war with each other. This territory of theirs has some loyalty issues, so they would benefit greatly if they sent Vaughn there to gain trust. It's incredibly dangerous in the village because it's surrounded by the war going on, and it's under constant attacks from monsters. It's also an impossible place to defend, and it's practically a death trap. Marquise was going to end Vaughn's life anyway, so Mercia thinks he could at least make use of Vaughn by sending him to the village. Marquise likes the idea, so he puts his sword away and declares that Vaughn will become the lord of that village. He tells Mercia that he did a good job because he was able to find a good use for the useless Vaughn. Vaughn is absolutely shocked as they leave, and Mercia apologizes. He couldn't bear to see anything horrible happen to Vaughn, so he made the rash proposal. Vaughn is being sent somewhere dangerous, so Mercia says that he's free to hate him if he wants. Vaughn points out that he wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for Mercia, so he's actually very grateful. Mercia promises to do whatever he can to help him, so the two brothers shake hands. The next morning, Till says that she doesn't care about the results of some dumb test. Even without magic, Vaughn is still a wise and upstanding noble in her eyes. She is furious about Vaughn being sent to a remote village, and she calls it outrageous. Vaughn thanks her for worrying about him, but he says that right now he's looking forward to it. A lord of a rural town won't have much to do, so Vaughn looks forward to having more free time. If things go well, Vaughn believes that he will finally be able to live a fun and laid-back life. He's really optimistic, as he declares that he will turn it into a place that he really likes to live in. Unfortunately, the king couldn't care less about Vaughn now, so he's being sent without any knights. The only people that will be going with him are 10 adventurers that Mercia hired. At first, they were only going to let him take Kamsim with him, but Vaughn knows that it would have been terrible for them. Luckily, his brother kept that from being the case, so he can only thank Mercia. Just then, Till arrives to remind Vaughn that she is his personal maid, which is why she will be coming with him. Dee appears out of nowhere and reveals that he will be coming as well. He still plans to teach Vaughn everything he knows about the sword, and nothing's going to stop him. It's a very kind gesture, but Vaughn can't help but think how he's going to put him through more training. Just then, Esparta is the next to say that he's coming with because he just retired as a butler. He has decided to supervise Vaughn's studies for fun during his retirement, and Vaughn can't believe that everyone is joining him. As they leave, Till points out that Vaughn has a big smile on his face. Vaughn didn't realize it at first, but now he can tell that he was really anxious about going out on his own. Vaughn then thinks about how the family crest isn't on this carriage because Marquise wanted to send him away without anyone knowing. Vaughn fully expects this to be a sad departure from his home, but a little girl comes out of nowhere to say goodbye. It turns out that the entire kingdom knows he's leaving, and they have all gathered to wish him farewell. One of these knights explains that Dee was upset after hearing that Vaughn was being sent away in secret. They couldn't do anything about him being sent away, so Dee wanted to at least make sure that his departure was a grand one. Vaughn points out that no one was supposed to know about this, but there's no way to tell Dee that because the soldier says that he's asleep right now. He can't even tell everyone to go away, so Vaughn will have no choice but to accept everyone's kind farewell. Just then, Vaughn is shocked as he sees that Dee isn't actually asleep and he's getting the crowd hyped up to say goodbye. The departure's more grand than Vaughn could have ever expected as they tell him to take care of himself, and Vaughn says goodbye to everyone. On the way to the village, Vaughn tries out his power for the first time. He's able to turn a twig into a small dagger, and he explains that this is what production magic is. Vaughn figured he would start trying it out here and there, just in case he ends up needing it. He has an aptitude for it, and he hopes there's a good way to make use of it. They have been traveling for some time now, so Till says that they should be arriving at the village soon. Vaughn tells Kamsin that if he ends up not liking the village, he can return to the manor. They have a slave contract, but Vaughn doesn't want to force him to live in the village. He says that he can release Kamsin from the slave contract, and he would tell Murica to make sure that he's treated right. Kamsin of course declines the offer, as he declares that he's already decided to dedicate his life to Vaughn. It doesn't matter what kind of danger they're ever in, Kamsin's determined to protect him. Just then the carriage comes to a sudden stop, and Arb frantically explains that the village is under attack. Dee sees the culprits behind the attack and determines that they must be bandits or washed up mercenaries. He is sure that they're experienced fighters, so Vaughn assesses the situation. The village is surrounded by a tall fence, but it's ineffective against arrows. Dangerous-looking men are attacking from the front gate, so Vaughn determines that the villagers have to keep up their turtle-like defense. There are about 50 enemies, and Vaughn's group has way less numbers. Dee asks Vaughn for permission to join the battle, because if they all attack together, they should be able to defeat the bandits. The adventurers that Murica hired disagree, as they think it's too dangerous. The enemy outnumbers them by a wide margin, and they would just be throwing their lives away. Dee recognizes this guy as Ortho the Adventurer, and he says that he's aware of the danger. He already knows that they will take some losses, but he is sure that they can drive the bandits away. Ortho points out that the adventurers were only hired to guard Vaughn until they reached the village, and he would never accept a quest that risked the lives of his comrades. Dee doesn't back down, as he explains that this village is Vaughn's first territory. The villagers are his first citizens, so they must draw their swords to protect them from danger. Ortho admires his chivalry, but he explains that it has nothing to do with adventurers like them. Dee is furious, but he knows that he can't force them to fight. Instead, he just asks them to at least protect Vaughn, and he says that they can run away if things take a turn for the worst. Ortho agrees to do this, but Esparta is now the one to object. If Dee's life is taken in battle, the village will have no future, even if they take control. He says that they can't risk that, so Dee can only wonder what Esparta thinks they should do. Esparta reminds everyone that while he did serve as a simple butler at the mansion, he is still an elemental mage. He assures them that they can count on his combat prowess, but the adventurers find it hard to believe that this guy can fight. Esparta just goes right into explaining his plan by saying that he will first create a defensive wall. It will serve as a shield, so he asks the adventurers to fire ranged attacks from behind it. Once the enemy's focus is on the ranged attackers, Dee and his men will charge in from the flank. They are severely outnumbered, but a sequence of surprise attacks will improve their chances of victory. Vaughn wonders if Esparta is really planning to stay behind and fight, so Esparta reveals that this was always his plan. If he doesn't act as a decoy and continue attacking from behind the wall, then Dee and his men will lose their lives for nothing. Vaughn is still against it because he is sure that Esparta will lose his life in battle, but Esparta doesn't waver. He declares that this is one last chance to show off his old man strength, and he pleads for Vaughn to allow him this selfish request. Vaughn admires his determination, but he points out that Esparta has contributed so much to his family. Vaughn refuses to let his life end in a place like this, and he says the same for Dee and his men. If they lose their expert strategist Esparta and their best fighter Dee, then it will be impossible for them to develop this land. If Vaughn fails this mission, he's sure that his father will take his life. Vaughn can't allow any of this to happen, so he declares that he will be the one to act as a decoy. Everyone is shocked by his decision, until immediately refuses. She would rather do it herself, and Kamsen says the same thing. Vaughn appreciates what they're trying to do, but Till is very precious to him, and he doesn't want to see her life ended. The same goes for Kamsen, especially because he should be free right now and enjoying his life. Vaughn has already made his decision, so he declares that he will ride the carriage into the battle and attack head on. That way the rest of their group can attack from range on both flanks. Dee tries to stop him once more, but Vaughn reminds him of something. He did sword training with him every day, so he won't lose his life easily. Vaughn says that even if he were to lose his life here, he can't think of a better end for a lord than sacrificing his life for his people. Vaughn's speech is incredibly inspiring, and Ortho's completely shocked by Vaughn's determination. Ortho hated the idea of guarding a noble when he first heard about the mission because he believed that there were no good men among the upper nobility. He was sure that they all looked down on adventurers and common folk, so none of them were worth protecting. The only reason he accepted the quest was because he wanted to keep getting high-paying jobs from the guild, so he had no choice. Ortho was surprised when Vaughn arrived to greet the adventurers when he heard that they would be the ones guarding him. Vaughn politely introduced himself and thanked them for their service. The other adventurers pointed out how wrong Ortho was when he said that there were no good nobles, because Vaughn was clearly a polite young man. After Vaughn left, the other adventurers were relieved to see that they would be guarding an ordinary kid. Even Ortho had to admit that he was wrong, as he realized that not every noble was the same. Vaughn is a good kid, and seeing how determined he is to protect his village has changed Ortho's mind. Ortho marches forward and says that just this once, he will entrust their lives to Vaughn. Vaughn tries to stop him, but Ortho interrupts him. A child saying that he's willing to risk his life can't be ignored, and Ortho wouldn't be able to face his comrades if he didn't do something. His comrades are on the exact same page as they realize how wrong they were before. They used to ridicule the idea of a noble having resolve because the nobles they've met until now were all talk. Vaughn, on the other hand, was ready to put his life on the line, and everyone's inspired. Vaughn had no idea that he was having this kind of effect on Pluriel and the others, and Pluriel can only laugh because Vaughn even took the time to memorize the names of adventurers like them. It's those kind of things that Vaughn does that makes them feel like they can trust him with their lives. Dee is next to step up as he declares that he and his men are noble knights in service of the royal family. Protecting Vaughn here and now means defending the future of the house. Esparta joins in by saying that he cannot condone Vaughn using such an irresponsible strategy. He will fight with the others, but once the enemy is dealt with, he will have to teach Vaughn the responsibility he bears as a potential heir to the royal family. Esparta joins Dee and Ortho on the front lines and says that he will amend his strategy. First, he will create a defensive wall and fire ranged attacks. Then Dee's men will take the left flank, while Ortho's group charges in from the right. Everyone's ready, so Esparta immediately creates the wall. It's up in the blink of an eye, and the adventurers say that they didn't expect the old butler to be such a powerful mage. They're also still impressed by Vaughn, and Ortho even says that he would welcome him becoming the king. The bandits meanwhile haven't noticed the giant wall that Esparta put up behind them. They're too focused on conquering the village, and they are sure that it will be a cakewalk. This isn't the case, however, as arrows begin to rain down on them, and several of the bandits are eliminated. They finally notice that the arrows are coming from behind the wall, so their leader declares that they will attack whatever's behind it. The bandits go charging in, but Dee appears to start wiping them out. He runs through their group with incredible force and eliminates several of them with his blade. Ortho's right there with him, and Dee says that everything's going as planned. The enemy fell for their decoy, and they were able to surprise them from both flanks. The battle's really heating up now, so Ortho tells his men not to let the knights show them up. The knights and the adventurers are charging in from both flanks, so the bandits realize that they're surrounded. The bandits still have a number advantage, but our heroes make up for it with pure skill. The terrifyingly powerful Dee tells his enemies to step forward if they want their lives ended, so the bandits start running away from him. Just then the bandit leader rushes towards the wall, and Ortho realizes that he's targeting the people on the other side. Ortho desperately calls out for someone to stop him, but it's too late. The bandit leader has made it past the wall, where he finds a defenseless Pluriel. He prepares to end her life, but Vaughn manages to get his attention. Vaughn maneuvers his way to the guy's back, and he cuts him down with his blade. Campson then follows up Vaughn's attack and puts an end to the bandit leader's life. The battle isn't over yet though, as Vaughn says that there's a good chance that the enemy will focus on their position. He tells everyone to pay attention to what's in front of them, and Pluriel can only wonder how Vaughn can be so composed. The battle ends a while later, and Ortho reviews the situation. The enemy took huge losses, while Vaughn and his group suffered no casualties. This is the best possible outcome, and it's a complete victory. Once Ortho receives payment, their quest will be complete, and they can leave. However, Ortho says that he has become curious about Vaughn's potential. He knows that there won't be much money in it, but he wonders what his group thinks about staying in this village for a while. Some of the adventurers would rather go on another quest, so they leave, but Ortho and his men stay behind. Pluriel is especially interested in staying because Vaughn saved her life and she wants to repay him. The others were really impressed by how Vaughn carried himself on the battlefield, and they can't believe he's only 10 years old. He's also much nicer than any other noble they have ever met, so they're all eager to see what this village becomes under Vaughn's leadership. Ortho wonders if they're all ready to stay here to help Vaughn, and they all agree. Meanwhile, Till scolds Vaughn for putting his life in danger. She is furious and she demands for him to let her risk her life first next time. Dee arrives to congratulate Vaughn on a job well done, and Vaughn says the same back to the commander. As for Esparta, he senses that the villagers have gathered near the entrance. Vaughn remembers that this is their first time here, so he prepares to meet everyone. Inside the village, Till notices that this place has a lot more space than she imagined. Vaughn introduces himself to the village chief named Rhonda, and Rhonda thanks him for saving their village. Unfortunately, these attacks have happened before, and they have been attacked several times this year alone. Vaughn can only wonder why this village is being targeted, so Rhonda explains their past. Back when they were part of Fredinato County, knights patrolled the area to protect them. Unfortunately, that all went away when the village became part of the territory that Vaughn's father controls. Vaughn can only apologize to them, as he explains that his father has not been informed about the status of the smaller villages yet. Rhonda is terrified by this statement because it makes it seem like the smaller villages are not worth protecting. They practically pay nothing in taxes, so he fears that is why the king doesn't care about them. Vaughn tries to calm them down by saying that complaining about the state of the kingdom won't do any good, but it just makes things worse. The villagers don't want to hear that kind of talk from a noble because he can't possibly understand how hard things are for them. Vaughn tries to calm them down again by explaining that his main concern is the future of this village. He admits that nobles have their flaws and they're to blame for passing laws that don't benefit the smaller villages. Unfortunately, they can't do anything about that right now, so Vaughn says that they should focus on thinking of ways to protect this village. Vaughn has already thought it over, and he has come up with 3 measures that they can take. First, Vaughn says that they need to produce something so valuable that the kingdom can't ignore this village. Then they need to regularly earn enough money to hire mercenaries. Lastly, they need to improve and develop the village themselves. The villagers say that they've come up with ideas like that before, but it's always easier said than done. Vaughn acknowledges that it must have been difficult before, but he declares that things will be different now because their new lord has arrived. This village is all he cares about now, so he will do everything he can to defend and develop it. His inspiring words have no effect on the villagers, so Vaughn can tell that they don't trust him yet. Just then, Esparta introduces himself and explains that he has served the king as his head butler for many years. He vouches for Vaughn by explaining that he has been entrusted with land at the age of 8 after being considered a prodigy. Dee introduces himself next by saying that he's the deputy commander of the king's knights, and he also vouches for Vaughn. The villagers are in shock because the king's head butler and deputy commander have come to their village. They're clearly very important people, so they can only wonder what they're doing here. Rhonda wonders if Vaughn being a prodigy means he can use elemental magic, so Vaughn reveals that he can. He says that it's only production magic though, so they shouldn't expect too much from him in combat. It's clear that the villagers are disappointed to hear this, but Vaughn says that he just hasn't figured out his powers yet. Just then, one of the villagers brings up the problem with taxes. So far, it's been an incredible struggle to give 30% of their harvest, and it's been having a terrible effect on the village. Vaughn wastes no time in fixing this, as he says that they can cut it down to 10% for a while. He has a lot of plans for this village, so it's important to secure a stable way of life first. The villagers are shocked to hear that the taxes will be lowered, and it's a huge relief. Vaughn declares that it's time to get started, and they will begin by strengthening the village's defensive walls. He wonders if Esparta's earth magic wall is long-lasting, but unfortunately it's not. It maintains its integrity while active, but when the mana fades, it becomes a simple mound of dirt. Vaughn determines that they will have to replace the wall with something sturdier, but they need something in the meantime. It will only be a temporary measure, so he asks Esparta to create a wall of dirt for them. Esparta does it immediately, and all the villagers are amazed by his incredible power. Vaughn also wants to build a moat to slow down any intruders, so Dee tells him to leave the job to the knights. Vaughn really has the attention of the villagers now, so he tells them that everyone's cooperation is vital right now. If they all stand together, this village can be reborn even stronger than before. A while later, Till wonders what Vaughn is doing out in the woods. He explains that he was thinking of testing out his production magic, so he has gathered a pile of wood. As he tries his magic, Vaughn notices that he can feel a warmth slowly growing in the pit of his stomach. Vaughn walks himself through the process of using production magic by reminding himself to focus on controlling his mana. Once the mana reaches his fingertips, he must sense every fiber of the wood. Then he will spin them together to make them stronger, like plied thread, before weaving the fibers even more tightly to make a block of wood. The process is a complete success, as Vaughn creates the block, but the others can only wonder what it is. Vaughn explains that it's a fiber block, and he compares it to how microfiber is made. Unfortunately, microfiber only exists in his old world, so the others have no clue what he's talking about. A while later, Ortho comes strolling by, and he's shocked when he sees what Vaughn has been up to. Till explains that Vaughn made these blocks, and the adventurers can't help but notice how many there are. Ortho touches one of them, and notices that they're lighter and harder than he expected. Vaughn gives him permission to cut one in half, but Ortho finds that he can't even scratch it with his blade. Ortho says that he swung at it hard enough to cut through a stone, but this block Vaughn created is incredibly tough. None of them have ever seen anything like it before, and they all wonder if it's really just made of wood. Vaughn is pleased with what he created, and he determines that these blocks could be surprisingly useful. A while later, Till wonders if Vaughn has exhausted his mana yet, because he's been creating all sorts of weapons and tools. Vaughn says he feels fine, and he doesn't understand why production magic has such a bad reputation. He heard that the mana consumption of production magic is really intense. Supposedly, it consumes so much mana that it's almost impossible for most people to make even just one thing. Vaughn doesn't know the full potential of his power yet, but what he does know is that he can easily create weapons. Kamsen really likes the sword Vaughn just made, so Vaughn tells him he can have it. Kamsen promises to cherish it forever, and Till eagerly waits to see what Vaughn will give her. Vaughn hands her an axe, but she isn't very excited about it. Vaughn wonders if there's something wrong with it, so Till tells him that she only went quiet because she was entranced by the weapon's beauty. Vaughn can tell that she doesn't like it, so he thinks about making her a nice accessory later. That night, Vaughn thinks about how his body's sore from all the traveling. They've hardly had any breaks, but worst of all, Vaughn hasn't been able to bathe. Vaughn is sure that the others are tired as well, because they've only been camping this entire time. They can't keep living like this, so Vaughn decides that they need to secure their basic needs before strengthening the village's defenses. Vaughn thinks about what would be the best thing to make first, and he determines that they should make a house. The next day, Rondell wonders what our heroes are doing, so Vaughn reveals that they're building a home for themselves. This spot used to be a public square, but it hasn't been used in the longest time. There's a lot of space, so Rondell says that it's the perfect place for Vaughn's mansion. Vaughn is finally ready, so he determines that it's time to find out if he can actually make something as large as a house. Vaughn gathers all his focus and determines that he must start with the 4 pillars that will go in each corner. The pillars require fine wires to go deep into the ground so that they can have a strong foundation. After that comes the floors and the walls to connect the pillars. Finally, after all that, Vaughn finishes up his home with the roof. Vaughn declares that he's finished, and everyone's in complete disbelief. The villagers begin to gather, and the adventurers wonder what just happened. Till explains that Vaughn just built a house for them to live in, but they can't believe that he did it in such a short time. The knights and the adventurers couldn't be happier with their new home, and everyone gets a good look as the dust finally settles. Vaughn doubted himself at first because everyone told him that production magic is useless, but he realizes now that his magic is actually very useful. Vaughn looks at the beautiful home he created for him and his friends, and he can't help but wonder if he made it a little too big. No one can believe that Vaughn made a giant house so fast, and they determine that his production magic is better suited for governing a territory than elemental magic. Vaughn agrees that it's an interesting skill, but he still thinks that offensive magic is still best for protecting people. He is sure that people would feel much safer living under the protection of a powerful lord, but his friends assure him that that isn't the case. Esparta says that he would be correct in times of war, but what people seek is simply a lord who will improve their lives. In that way, Esparta says that no one is better suited than Vaughn. What Vaughn just did was incredible, and Northo has determined that Vaughn's powers far exceed those of regular production magic users. Vaughn isn't done, as he says that if they bring him the lumber, he can even make houses for everyone else. Everyone is stunned to hear this, so Ortho and Dee tell their men to hurry and gather the materials. The villagers all want homes as well, and Vaughn quickly realizes that he doesn't know what he got himself into. Their homes are in really bad shape though, so Vaughn decides that he will start by dramatically renovating the people's lives in the village. Vaughn agrees to make everyone a home, so they all celebrate. Vaughn finishes making a bunch of houses, and everyone's amazed by his huge mana capacity. His extensive knowledge on how to construct a neighborhood is also very impressive, and Vaughn explains that it's called a grid plan. It has a 4-home block as its fundamental unit, and large streets run between the blocks. Vaughn says that these homes should work for now, but when they eventually obtain lots of stone, he will rebuild each home to better suit its residents. Vaughn also built a bath next to his mansion simply because he wanted to bathe. He went with a simple design for the bathtub, and Pluriel used her water magic to fill the tub. That night, after taking a bath, Vaughn finally gets to sleep in a nice comfy bed. The next day, Vaughn is told that thanks to the knights, they now have a trench around the village. Vaughn is very pleased with this, but it would be ideal for their defenses to fill it with water and make it a moat. Beyond that, they will need water for drinking and for use in the bath. This makes it clear what their next job should be, so Vaughn declares that it's time to find a water source. They quickly diverted water from a nearby river with the help of Esparta's great powers. He instantly dug a trench a few meters long, while Dee and the others extended it by hand. Vaughn followed behind to strengthen the bottom and the sides of the trench. There's a lot of distance between the river and the village, so Till says that it's quite the project. It can't be helped though, as Vaughn points out that people need water. It's hard work, but having everyone pulling toward the same goal is pretty fun. Furthermore, once conditions are improved and less uncertain for people, it'll be easier for merchants to visit. This will be essential because it's the only way Vaughn will be able to live his laid-back life in the future. Vaughn determines that this job will take at least a week, but he's shocked when the workers point out that they can already see the village from where they are. Vaughn decides to call it a day for now, but Dee says that they will reach the village in a few hours if they keep going. Dee is eager to keep working, but Vaughn points out that the others are ready to pass out. Dee considers this to be a new kind of training, but he realizes that he can't push too far. The next day, Vaughn announces to everyone that they have finally completed the canal to carry the water to the village. He thanks everyone for their hard work, and he tells Esparta to open the water gate. Water comes flowing in, and all the villagers are amazed. The moat around the village is complete, and now it'll really be difficult for the bandits to attack the village walls. Vaughn fears that the moat will flood when it rains, so he wonders if he should create a lake behind the village too. Esparta thinks it's a good idea because that lake could be used as a reservoir that will be useful during droughts. Vaughn does that next, and the villagers can't believe that so much is happening. The village that once had no waterways now has a lake for a reservoir. Thanks to Vaughn, the villagers don't have to trek to the river every single day just to fetch water. The chief thanks him, but Vaughn says it's not necessary. He's glad that everyone has access to water now because life will be much easier for the entire village. That night, we see that a girl referred to as Lady Art is traveling with someone named Panamera. Panamera says that it's still a long way to a certain remote village, so she tells Art to get some rest. The next day, Vaughn finishes creating a giant defensive wall called the Rampart. The village wall used to just be a wall of dirt, but now it's an incredible construction. Ramparts have a wide top, so guards can even patrol on top of the wall. Everyone is really excited about this, because with a rampart this sturdy, the villagers can rest easy even when bandits strike. Vaughn shocks everyone when he says that he isn't satisfied with this because he wants to make the villagers feel even safer. Vaughn tries out making some basic crossbows, and everyone is stunned when he's finished. They say that these things aren't basic at all, and they're super impressive. Vaughn even attached shields to the front of them so the guards can fire arrows while protected from enemy attacks. This is really stunning, and it's clear now that Vaughn can make all sorts of things with his production magic. Their village is relatively small, but Vaughn is pleased because it's starting to look like a fortress city. Everyone agrees, and they say that mere bandits will never conquer it, no matter how hard they try. Dee is sure that if the king knew what Vaughn could do with his power, he would have made him the head of the house instead of banishing him to this remote village. The king thought that Vaughn was weak, but one look at what he has done to this village makes it clear that his power is more than sufficient for combat. Dee would argue that Vaughn is more powerful than anyone, but Esparta believes that his power is best for protection. The two begin to argue, but Vaughn settles them down. He says that they shouldn't get frustrated over their circumstances. They all just have to make do and fight with what they've got. Just then, Vaughn's stomach rumbles, so Till makes him a meal. It wasn't easy though, because they're short on ingredients. Esparta says that the defense of the village is important, but they must do something about the village's regular income. This village has no connections, aside from a few merchants who come here once a month. Vaughn doesn't think that this needs to be a priority because the village's crops are able to provide plenty of food for the village. However, Esparta points out that they don't have the ingredients to make Vaughn's favorite sweet-baked desserts, and Vaughn completely changes his mind. Not having those sweets is horrifying to him, so Vaughn declares that it's time to come up with something this village can sell. Kamsen thinks they should sell those woodblocks Vaughn can make, but Vaughn rejects the idea. Selling them wouldn't work, because only he can work with them. Everyone gives their suggestions, but Vaughn can tell that coming up with something to sell that is unique to this village will be difficult. Later, Vaughn learns that Till and Kamsen don't want to use their weapons. They were gifts from Vaughn, so they don't want to cause any damage to them. Vaughn points out that they need to learn how to defend themselves with those weapons, so they need to practice. Zara tells them not to worry, and he shows them his shield of the Orc Knight. It's sturdy and flexible, so it will be easy on their weapons when he blocks with it. Kamsen's first attack doesn't have a single bit of force behind it, but everyone is confused when the shield ends up on the ground. The shield is even cut in half, so everyone is amazed that the weapon was able to do so much damage with such little force. It's technically a wooden sword, so Vaughn is surprised that it was able to cut so well. Till fixes Zara's shield, and Arthur arrives to wonder what all the commotion is about. He has brought some ores that they mined, and he wonders if Vaughn would like to purchase them. Ortho explains that the forests around the nearby mountains are filled with strong monsters, so people have avoided that area. That place hasn't been mined before, which is why they can find a lot of rare ores without even having to go into the mountains. They were able to find iron, copper, silver ores, and even a little bit of gold. Ortho really stuns our hero though, when he reveals that they found mithril ore. This is great news, because if all this was at the foot of the mountains, then the actual mountains must hold a wealth of resources. Vaughn takes some of the iron ore, and he amazes everyone as he turns it into a solid block of iron. He says that he didn't melt it down to make it more pure, so he doesn't know how pure it is. Zara's really excited, so he wonders if Vaughn can make him a sword with it. Vaughn feels bad about what happened to his shield, so he says yes. Zara wants one long sword and one short, so Vaughn gets to work. This is his first time making an iron weapon, so it will take a lot of focus. He thinks hard about its shape and how sharp it must be, and soon he's done. This is Vaughn's first customer, so he paid extra attention to the sword's embellishments. Zara couldn't be happier with the short sword, so Vaughn gets to work on the next one. That one is just as amazing, so of course the other adventurers want weapons too. Vaughn points out that they were the ones to get the ores, so it's only right that he make them weapons. When he's done, everyone is certain that Vaughn can sell these weapons for a lot of money. Vaughn then looks at the mithril ore, and he wonders what the weapons would be like if he made them with mithril. Esparta is very intrigued with the mithril because he has never heard of anyone mining metallic ores in the woods. The only explanation is that there's a dungeon nearby. Esparta tells Vaughn that if they discover a dungeon, their situation would change massively. Hordes of people and goods would begin to flow in and out of this village. This gets Vaughn really excited because if they discover one, the importance of this village would jump dramatically. Dungeons have tons of resources in them, with gems as valuable as national treasures. Normally, when the guild receives words of a new dungeon, they open a branch in the nearest town or village. Unfortunately, Vaughn points out that their village doesn't have the resources to welcome the guild right now. Esparta agrees, because the guild coming here would bring many adventurers, merchants, and even the chivalric order. Right now, their village lacks the facilities, food, and infrastructure to support them. If this news spread, a neighboring nation would attack them, seeking to profit off the dungeon. On top of that, Vaughn points out that he's the black sheep of his family. If his father found out that the village he was sent to actually had value, he would be sent somewhere else. This means that Vaughn needs to grow this village and produce results before discovering the dungeon. Ortho's on the same page, so he says that they will avoid the location where the dungeon is likely to be when they gather resources. Vaughn knows that the adventurers could gain a lot by just reporting this to the guild, so he appreciates that they're holding back for the sake of the village. A while later, Vaughn is pleased with how everything looks, so he says that this concludes their dramatic renovation. Till wonders if Vaughn really isn't out of mana yet, because he has been making tons of houses and weapons. Vaughn says that he's fine, and only feels a bit tired. Just then, a messenger urgently reveals that some armored lizards are approaching the village. Vaughn immediately instructs everyone to get inside the walls, and orders for the drawbridge to be raised and the gate to be closed. All the villagers are terrified, because they know how dangerous these monsters are, but Vaughn has no fear. He knows that everyone is afraid of battle, but he reminds them that the lives of everyone in this village depend on what they do. Vaughn promises to fight for everyone, but he can't protect them with his strength alone. That is why he tells the villagers to lend him their strength so they can all protect this village together. The villagers are ready to protect their village, so Vaughn instructs them to man the crossbows. Campson explains that the adventurers are out hunting, so they're not in the village. In that case, Vaughn decides that he must partake in the battle, but Till stops him. He sees just how serious she is, so he asks Dee to go up the wall and report down to him what's happening. This way he can issue orders from a safe distance, so Dee agrees. Dee is horrified by what he sees, so he reports that there are roughly 40 armed lizards. This is really bad, because even a bunch of veteran knights would struggle to take down just one armored lizard. There's no time to waste, so Vaughn tells Dee to load the crossbows. All the villagers follow Dee's command, and they launch their first attack. The arrows seemingly vanish when they hit the lizards, and Dee realizes that they're going right through them. After a while, they're able to take down 10 of the monsters, and the villagers begin to celebrate. There's still many left though, and they only have one bolt left per crossbow. They have no choice, so they fire their last arrows, and they manage to take out another wave of armored lizards. Unfortunately, they're out of iron arrows, and there's still many monsters left. Vaughn struggles to think of a solution, but he comes up with an idea. He tells Dee to use the wooden bolts, but the others fear that it won't do much. The scales on these armored lizards are made of steel, so wooden arrows would never pierce them. Dee tells him not to worry, because Vaughn has already defied his expectations in countless ways. He protected this village from bandits, then developed it at a tremendous pace. Dee won't ever doubt him again, so he has decided to put his faith in Lord Vaughn. The villagers launch the wooden arrows at the beasts, and the knights are shocked to see that the arrows are getting stuck in their heads. They wonder if this really worked, and everyone begins to celebrate as the monsters collapse to the ground. It's clear that the wooden arrows are enough to take the lizards down, so Dee orders for the villagers to keep firing them. He says that they will feast on lizard kebab tonight, and arrows begin to rain down on the monsters. Soon Dee announces that they have won the battle, and all the villagers cheer. Vaughn is given credit for his great decision, and he's just glad that it worked. The knights assess the situation, and they're very impressed. Not only did they avoid any casualties, not a single person on their side was even injured. Their victory was overwhelming, and this makes Dee realize that Vaughn is going to be a big deal. Later, the villagers harvest the giant lizards, and Dee tells everyone to take care when preserving their eyes and fangs. The guts can be thrown out, but they have to be sure to extract the magic cores. The harvesting is going much faster than expected, and it's all because of the incredible knives that Vaughn made. Vaughn arrives to see that they have tons of meat in the village now, which means that they can have a feast. The feast is held that night, and Vaughn gives a toast to their victory. The villagers thought that there would never come a day where they could enjoy themselves in this village, but Vaughn changed all that. The chief is amazed because it's hard to believe that there's a noble that enjoys spending time with lower class villagers. Vaughn's friends tell them that it's normal because it's just the way Vaughn is. Ortho wasn't there for the battle, but the story all made sense when he was told that the wooden arrows were made from the same stuff as their weapons. Just then, Dee overhears them talking about their weapons, so he declares that he will buy one from Vaughn as well. The other knights also want to buy some, but Vaughn says that he can never charge them. Once the village's finances are in order, he will make them all weapons for free. Afterwards, Ortho explains that they could sell the armored lizards to merchants and get 20 gold for each. Unfortunately, most of the meat will spoil, and Vaughn will have to pay for a transport fee. Accounting for that, they will probably be able to get 8 gold for each. There are still 40 of them left, so they will get a little over 300 gold. Vaughn does the conversion, and he's amazed when he realizes that this is about 300 million yen. Unfortunately, Esparta must remind him about something. When a village makes more than 100 gold, it's required to pay 50% in the form of taxes. There's no way to keep it a secret either, because it will be discovered immediately if they try to sell this much at once. That would bring the profit down to 150 gold, but the worst part is that Vaughn's father will learn about how well this village is doing. If he learns that this place has value, then he will exile Vaughn to a different remote area. Esparta comes up with an idea and says that they could try reporting this to Vaughn's brother Mercia. They could give him the glory of defeating the armored lizards, and no one would get suspicious. Later, some merchants arrive at the village, but they wonder if they're at the right place. They have been here before, but it doesn't look like the old remote village that they remember. Vaughn introduces himself as the lord of this village, and they immediately recognize him as the son of Marquise. He is known for being a prodigy, so they wonder what he's doing here. The merchants introduce themselves as Mari and Rango, so Vaughn welcomes them to their village. Inside, the guys are absolutely stunned when they see what Vaughn has to sell them. They are the materials from the armored lizards, and the guys can't believe that they managed to defeat such a huge army. Even adventurers fear these giant monsters, so the guys struggle to believe that this tiny village fought off so many of them. They are eager to buy everything, but they will need about a month to transport it all. Vaughn agrees, because these guys will have to recruit more men for this job. Unfortunately, the meat won't stay good for that long, so Vaughn tells them that they can take some for free. In return, Vaughn would like for them to take a look at some of the weapons they're selling. The guys had no idea that there was a blacksmith in this village, and Vaughn doesn't tell them that it's actually him. The guys are really impressed with the weapons, so they agree to buy them at Vaughn's asking price. Vaughn even takes it a step further by asking if they would promote the weapons as well, but they are hesitant. The guys can tell how incredible these weapons are, so they don't want to share them with any other merchants. Vaughn knows that they just want to make a good profit, so he comes up with an idea. He points out that if they sell the weapons just outside the village, then everyone will figure out where they came from. People will come to the village searching for them, and that could be a good opportunity. This is why Vaughn says that the guy should set up a shop inside the village before they start promoting. They will be doing the hard work of getting the word out about the weapons, and they will have a shop ready for anyone that comes searching for them. The guys wonder if Vaughn would really be okay with that, so Vaughn says that he would. Vaughn builds the shop right away, and the guys are even more amazed. They just finished telling Vaughn what they thought the shop should look like, and he made it in the blink of an eye. Just then we see that the girls have arrived at the village. Panamera is concerned about something, so she says that she will find out if Vaughn is really a prodigy herself. Inside Vaughn's mansion, Esparta explains that the village is growing at an incredible rate. He believes that more people will come, so they need to build a town that can hold 10,000 people. As they develop the land, they will need plenty of people to guard the village and administer its facilities. Furthermore, Vaughn will have to decide what kind of fortress town they want to be. Square fortress towns are the most common design, but Vaughn has other ideas. He wants to use a star design because attackers will have to spend time conquering the pointy parts to get near the main parts. If they try to ignore them, then they will just end up getting attacked from 3 different angles. Just then, Vaughn is told that an emissary from Ferdinando County has arrived to see him. Panamera introduces herself as a knight, and Art introduces herself as the youngest daughter of Count Ferdinando. Art is here to pay her respects on her father's instructions, so she hopes that they can get along. Vaughn, however, can tell that they're actually here to assess the state of their enemy and possibly win him over. Panamera is impressed with his conclusion because he is right. Vaughn has been entrusted with land between Ferdinando County and the Kingdom of Yelenita, so Ferdinando is wary of him. He fears that Vaughn might spearhead his father's unseemly ambitions. Panamera determines that Vaughn being sent all the way out here means that he doesn't have an aptitude for elemental magic. Vaughn knew that word would get out eventually, so he doesn't deny it. He says that Ferdinando's concerns are unwarranted because he's not planning anything with his father. Vaughn says that he was simply exiled here by his father, but Panamera doesn't believe him at all. She points out that Vaughn has turned this remote village of 100 people into a fortress in a matter of days. She suspects that at least 5,000 men were sent here with Vaughn to accomplish all this because it's their goal to turn this village into a new military outpost. Vaughn shocks her by laughing right in her face, and he can only apologize. She was so serious when saying all that, but there's a huge misunderstanding. Vaughn explains that all his father allowed him to bring was Kamsin and some of his luggage. He says that his family didn't even see him off, and Art is horrified to hear this. Panamera points out that his night butler and maid are here, but they explain that they came on their own. Dee was even ordered to return to the kingdom, but he just ignored it. Esparta says that he's retired, and he just wanted to hang out in a nice village. Till says that Vaughn cares about people more than anyone, which is why she has decided to serve him for the rest of her life. Panamera is still skeptical, so she wonders how the village was able to change so fast. Vaughn determines that it would be best to show them, so he takes them outside. He says that he will make a rampart like the one that surrounds their village, but Panamera can't believe it. She is amazed when Esparta makes it clear that he's a great elemental mage, but this wall won't be enough. Panamera knows that once this wall loses its mana, it will come crumbling down. This is where Vaughn steps in, so he uses his magic to turn the wall of dirt into a rampart. He then uses some of his blocks to create a gate right in front of their eyes. The girls can't believe what they're seeing, and they can only wonder what Vaughn's magical aptitude is. Vaughn explains that he has an aptitude for production magic, and it's not what people think it is. Society calls it the most unfortunate magic of all, but they are wrong. Art is stunned by this, and she has visions of her past. Vaughn explains that the instant his father learned about his aptitude, he drove him out of their home. Panamera calls Marquise a fool because with Vaughn's power, he could have expanded his influence drastically. He exiled him though, and now he doesn't even know about Vaughn's power. Panamera is convinced, so she reveals that the real reason she's here is to offer Art's hand in marriage. Vaughn can tell that Ferdinando wants them to get married so they can just leave his kingdom alone. Vaughn explains that he plans to continue strengthening and developing this fortress town, but he doesn't seek conflict with anyone. He doesn't want to fight anyone, so there's no need for marriage. Vaughn says that Art wouldn't be happy here anyway because it's really dangerous. Panamera says that she came here to prevent the marriage, but her feelings have changed. After meeting Vaughn, she would happily welcome him getting married to Art. He possesses great foresight, and he has the power to unite people behind him. She wonders how Art feels about marrying him, and she doubts that she will ever find a better man. Art does think that Vaughn is a good person, but she doesn't know about marrying him just yet. Vaughn hasn't even considered marriage at his age, so they decide to hold off on that. Vaughn is shocked when Panamera reveals that they will be staying here for another day, and she's delighted to see Vaughn acting his age for once. Panamera wonders if Vaughn has a spare room they can stay in, and they're both shocked when Vaughn says that he will make an inn. Vaughn makes the inn immediately, and the girls can't believe their eyes. At dinner, Vaughn wonders what kind of things Art likes. She explains that she likes cute things, like dolls and flowers, but Vaughn hasn't seen much of those. Art offers to show him the one she brought with her, and she's shocked by how interested he is. The others want to see them as well, so Art feels really welcomed here. That night, Art thanks Vaughn for the wonderful day. She was really nervous at first, but seeing how nice he is was a huge relief. Art says goodnight as she runs off, and Vaughn is just glad that he made a good first impression. Back home, Esparta determines that Art was most likely sent here for the same reason Vaughn was. She probably can't use elemental magic, so Vaughn realizes that it was hard for her to say that she was driven away from home just like he was. Vaughn is okay with that, and decides that she can stay in this village if she's not able to return home. That night, Panamera wonders if they should stay a while longer. Art says it's a great idea, and she heads to bed. She thinks about talking to Vaughn the next day, and it's the first time in a long while that she's actually looking forward to waking up. The next morning, the others urgently wake Vaughn up. There's something going on at the lake Vaughn created, and Dee and Esparta are already at the scene. Vaughn eventually arrives and finds everyone wondering who the mysterious girl is in the lake. She belongs to a race called the Apkalu, which means that she is half human and half fish. They usually live in rivers that are deep inside of a forest, but for some reason a number of them are here in the lake Vaughn made. They are a rare species that few ever encounter, so Vaughn tries asking the girl what she's doing here. He tries to ask for her name, but she doesn't respond at all. Vaughn wonders if she can even understand him, so she tries to offer him some food instead. Everyone is amazed when this seems to work as the girl approaches him. The girl emerges from the water to ask if she can really eat this food, and Vaughn says that she can. She's impressed by the meat, so Vaughn explains that it's armored lizard meat. The fish girl wonders who defeated the lizards, and everyone answers that it was Vaughn. Vaughn tries to give them the credit, but they are confident that it was all because of him. The girl leaves immediately, so Vaughn wonders if she will come back the next day because he promised to give her more meat if she did. Esparta explains that her species is rarely sighted, so he doubts that she will come back. He is very wrong, however, because the next day several more of them appear. The girl is among them, and Vaughn begins to wonder if he did something bad. If the Apkalos see the armored lizards as gods, then they might be upset after what happened. One of the fishmen demands to speak with Vaughn, and Vaughn can't help but notice how this guy looks way scarier than the others. Vaughn is relieved when the guy simply thanks him for being nice to his daughter. Vaughn realizes that he's talking about the girl he fed, and he's glad that it isn't something worse. The guy wonders if Vaughn was really the one who defeated the armored lizards, and Vaughn says that everyone's giving him the credit. The Apkalu are stunned because they can't believe that someone so young could also be so powerful. They wonder if he's some kind of legendary mage, but Vaughn tries to explain that he didn't do it himself. The guy interrupts him and gives Vaughn permission to marry his daughter. Vaughn can't believe it, so the guy wonders if there's a problem. He introduces himself as Lara Vesta, and he explains that his daughter is his only child. Vaughn points out that she's too young to even be mentioned in marriage, so he wonders why Lara Vesta is doing this. Lara Vesta begins his explanation by pointing out that his people have avoided making ties with humans. However, in recent years, armored lizards have taken over the rivers, and many of his people have lost their lives. That is why he's looking for someone strong to marry his daughter Lara. Vaughn sums it all up by saying that this guy is offering up his daughter as a bride to forge an alliance with a powerful human. Vaughn responds by saying that the marriage part won't be necessary. Lara Vesta fears that he's refusing the alliance, but Vaughn says that he will protect their tribe regardless. Lara Vesta is grateful for Vaughn's generosity because it means that they will be able to stay here. Like always though, Vaughn isn't done, as he says that it's time to start building. Lara Vesta has no clue what he means, so he's absolutely stunned when Vaughn creates some buildings for them. He explains that they are rest areas, and everyone can use them whenever they want. Vaughn is happy to see everyone enjoying the area, but Esparta reminds him that they have other business to take care of. It's time for them to deal with the sewage situation, and Lara Vesta wonders what that is. Vaughn explains that he placed sewer pipes underneath the buildings in the village. They regularly send water from the moat down the pipes to flush away all the sewage. It's not an easy process, so Vaughn is surprised when Lara Vesta offers to help. They work together to do the job, and Vaughn can't believe how much easier it was with their help. This job must be done several times a day, so Lara Vesta tells Vaughn to leave the job to them from now on. Vaughn wonders if that's really okay, so Lara Vesta explains that it's their way of thanking him for letting them live here. Just then, Art and Panamera arrive, and they're stunned to see the rare Apkalu. Lara Vesta calls Vaughn his son-in-law as he thanks him once again, and Art is horrified to hear this. Vaughn tries to explain that he's not married to anyone, but Lara interrupts him. She declares that she is Vaughn's wife, and she says goodbye to her husband. Later, Vaughn takes Art on a boat so the two of them could get some fresh air. Vaughn wants to clear the air about what happened with Lara, but Art already heard the real story. She knows that it was a misunderstanding, and she apologizes for overreacting. Art points out how incredible Vaughn is because he built this lake and developed the entire village. Just then, Lara and a bunch of the other Apkalu appear. They shake the boat a little too much, and it brings Vaughn closer to Art. Lara is furious with her husband, but Vaughn reminds her that they aren't married. Later, Lara Vesta is upset about Vaughn flirting with another woman when he already has Lara. Vaughn tries to clear things up, but Lara Vesta comes up with an idea. He says that the only way to settle this is with a competition. Vaughn will compete against the Apkalu, and if they win, Vaughn will officially recognize his marriage with Lara. Vaughn is horrified by the idea, but Dee steps in to say that Vaughn accepts the challenge. Dee assures him that he will bring Vaughn the victory, and Esparta thinks that it would be best to just get it over with. Lara Vesta then explains that it will be a 3-round competition. He lets Vaughn choose the nature of the first round, so Vaughn chooses volleyball. No one has ever heard of such a sport, so Vaughn explains the rules to them. Till and Panamera volunteer for this round, and they will go against Lara Vesta and Lara. Lara Vesta demonstrates his immense power by immediately scoring the first point, and Vaughn fears that he might be really good at volleyball. This is proven almost immediately as the Apkalu begin to crush Vaughn's team. Till feels terrible for letting Vaughn down, but Panamera reminds her to never give up. Their teamwork goes up another notch, and they finally manage to score their first point. They declare that the real match starts now, and the game quickly intensifies. They manage to claw their way back, and now they're tied. This is match point, and that means that the next to score wins. Lara sets her father up for the perfect spike, and Till does her best to stop it. Till is down on herself once again for failing, but Panamera reminds her to never stop looking to the future. Vaughn is not inspired at all, and he just wonders if he's watching some kind of sports anime. Lara Vesta says that he will choose the next event, so he picks swimming. Vaughn is horrified by this choice, because if they lose one more event, he will have to marry Lara. The Apkalu are natural swimmers, so it's not looking good. Just then, Dee tells Vaughn to leave it to him. Kamsin also volunteers and says that he will do his best. The race is a 2-person relay, so Kamsin and Lara started off. Of course, the half-fish person takes a commanding lead, but Kamsin's not one to give up. His pure tenacity allows him to catch up to the fish, so Lara Vesta tells his daughter to get serious. Lara goes underwater, and she once again takes the lead. She reaches the marker, so her teammate takes over. Kamsin does as well, so Dee springs into action. He uses the butterfly stroke, and the others explain that this swimming technique allows him to use his muscles to the fullest. Dee swims like a madman, and Lara Vesta can only wonder how he's doing it. Dee is able to win the race, and Lara Vesta can't believe that his fish people lost. There is one final event left, so Lara Vesta allows Vaughn to choose what it will be. Just then, Vaughn creates a device that the others haven't seen before, and he asks Pluriel to make some ice for him. Vaughn uses the machine to shave the ice, and some syrup to give it flavor. Of course, the others have no clue what's going on, so Vaughn reveals that the final event will be a shaved ice speed eating contest. They will compete in teams of 2, so Art volunteers to be Vaughn's teammate. The contest begins, and the competitors start eating the ice. Lotta and her father find out immediately that this won't be easy when they feel the sharp pain of brain freeze. Lotta Vesta reminds himself that this is for Lotta, so he keeps eating. Vaughn's team is struggling as well, and he begins to fear that he made a terrible choice. He sees that Art isn't giving up, so Vaughn pushes himself even more. The competition ramps up as everyone goes into an eating flow state, and everyone cheers for them. The race is close until the very end, but eventually Vaughn's team comes out on top. Vaughn is glad that they can finally put all this marriage talk behind them, but Lotta Vesta calls him son-in-law again. This competition simply proved to him that Vaughn is truly a man worthy of his daughter. Vaughn wonders what the point of this entire competition was, but Lotta Vesta doesn't answer. Vaughn's stomach is in a great deal of pain from all the ice, so the others tell him and Art that they did a great job. Art notices that Vaughn is always surrounded by smiling faces, and she wonders if she can ever make that happen for herself. Since the day she was born, her father was always busy, and she was alone. Her mother handed her off to a nanny and showed no interest in her. All this was because she was labeled a failure. She didn't excel at anything other than her marionette magic. Using her dolls as puppets, Art found that she could move them more freely than even her own body. Art thought that she could use it to make her mother smile, but her mother just punished her for reminding her how useless she was. That was when Art first learned that marionette magic is considered evil and it is hated by nobility. After that day, no one spoke to her, and she became someone that was always ignored. When she turned 10, she was sent away to marry Vaughn. Art felt terrible, but then she learned that Vaughn was just like her. Vaughn can only use production magic, and others considered it to be unfortunate. Vaughn was still brimming with confidence, and he made use of his gifts. Art now wonders what would have happened if she didn't stop practicing her magic. She wants to be confident just like Vaughn, so she's determined to start trying a little harder. Later, Vaughn tells everyone what he's planning. He wants to build even more ramparts around the village, and he tells everyone to work carefully. Just then, Art arrives to point out how nice the day is. Vaughn can tell that she seems more energetic today, so she thinks about why that is. She wants to see things the way Vaughn sees them, so she wonders if it would be okay to watch him while he works. Vaughn is delighted to hear this, and he says yes. Not everyone is having a good day though, as we see that the adventurers are running for their lives. A while later, Art is stunned as the star-shaped wall around the village is complete. The walls look incredibly sturdy, and everyone thanks Vaughn because his help allowed them to finish the walls in just 2 weeks. Vaughn's work is never done though, as he says that he will have to build more houses as more people like merchants and adventurers move to the village. Panamera is really envious because she has always dreamt about having her own land. She plans to fight hard in the next battle in the hopes that she can earn enough glory to ask for her own patch of land. Panamera points out that the crossbows this time look different than the others. Vaughn confirms that this is the upgraded version of the simple ones he made before. This version has a top and bottom that can fire separately, so it can fire 2 arrows at the same time. Vaughn has Kamsen test it out, and everyone is amazed by how powerful the crossbow fires the arrow. Panamera can't believe that the village has such powerful crossbows now, and Vaughn surprises her as he reveals that they now have 100 of them. Panamera says that she will pay any price to buy one, but Vaughn explains that they're not for sale. Panamera is determined to own one of them, so she says that she will owe him a favor in exchange. Vaughn is far more interested in this offer, so he agrees to give her one, and says that he will call in that favor later. Panamera says that she will craft the iron bolts herself to fire from the crossbows, but Kamsen thinks that she should at least take a couple of the bolts that Vaughn made. Panamera wonders what's so special about them, so Kamsen explains that it has to do with everything Vaughn makes. He shows her the sword Vaughn made him, and she's in disbelief. She has never seen a sword shaped like this before, and she could tell that it would make easy work of any enemy. Kamsen wonders if she has a spare sword that she doesn't mind breaking, so she brings one out. Panamera says that it's still a very sturdy sword, so she would be impressed if Kamsen even managed to chip it. Kamsen uses an attack to strike the sword, but Panamera is confused. She hardly felt any impact, and she wonders if Kamsen missed. Of course, she's stunned when her sword is sliced in half. Kamsen says that it's all thanks to Vaughn's sword, so Panamera desperately wants to know what material the sword is made of. Vaughn explains that it's ordinary iron, and he made the bolts for the crossbows the same way he made the sword. Vaughn says that they can even pierce armored lizards, and Panamera can't believe it. Of course, this makes her want a few iron bolts, so Vaughn agrees to give them to her. Just then, the adventurers desperately rush to the village while telling everyone to run. They are being followed by a terrifying dragon, and this thing is huge. Ortho says that they will keep drawing its attention so that the others can get everyone back to the village. Vaughn doesn't like the idea of them sacrificing themselves, so Vaughn wonders if they should fight the dragon instead. That would only endanger the villagers, so Vaughn wonders what he should do. Luckily, Panamera steps up and says that she will lend a hand. She instructs the adventurers to keep running towards them so they can hit the dragon with the crossbows. Panamera says that this is a forest dragon, which is a mid-class dragon with no breath weapon, and they will be battling it. She instructs all the villagers to get behind the ramparts, and Vaughn apologizes to Art for exposing her to such danger. Forest dragons are incredibly powerful, but Vaughn assures Art that they have enhanced crossbows to fight back with. On top of that, they will have Panamera's help. He says that they might not be able to slay the dragon, but they definitely won't lose. Vaughn instructs Till to take Art back to the village and summon Dee and his men. Deep down though, Vaughn knows how terrifying flying enemies can be. It won't be good if it reaches the village, so he tells the others to prepare the crossbows. He wants to get the dragon out of the air first, so he tells them to aim for its wings. Just then one of the adventurers falls, and he tells the others to just leave him behind. Ortho refuses, and he tries to get the dragon to come to him. It doesn't work, so Zara has no choice but to throw his sword at it. The dragon is chasing him now, so he tells everyone to forget about him and run to the village. Zara expects them to ignore his request like they did to the other guy, so he is shocked when they disagree. Ortho says that Zara is the fastest of them, so he is sure that he will be okay. Panamera instructs the guards to launch the first attack, but it's no use. They can't hit the fast-moving dragon, so Vaughn tries to think of a solution. Panamera declares that she's the one best suited to fight the dragon, so she will handle it herself. Vaughn can't believe it at first, but it makes sense. Panamera has earned the trust of her emperor at such a young age, which means she must be a top-class elemental mage. She makes this very clear as she uses her powerful fire javelin attack. Her spell is so powerful that it knocks the dragon right out of the sky and causes a huge explosion. Everyone is in awe of her immense power, but the dragon isn't done yet. Vaughn realizes now that he became arrogant after defeating the lizards. This dragon has humbled him because it's on a completely different level. Vaughn orders for everyone to fire all arrows, but the dragon continues its approach. They did manage to damage its wings, so it can't fly so easily. The dragon is incredibly smart though, as it predicts their next attack. Vaughn is glad to see that everyone made it inside the outer walls, but he knows that they will be in trouble if they don't get to the village. He would like to retreat as well, but there's no time. Just then Panamera says that she will give him the time he needs. Her attack is ferocious, and Vaughn realizes that this is a true pinnacle of fire magic. If she wasn't facing a dragon, this power of hers would be devastating. Panamera says that she will head back first so they can prepare more defenses. The others flee to the village, and we see that the dragon is being held back by Panamera's flames. Vaughn starts heading back afterwards, but the dragon is terrifying. It should be wounded by now, but is not showing any signs of giving up. Just then Esparta arrives and calmly starts walking to the dragon. Vaughn desperately tries to tell him that he should be retreating, and he says that he won't run unless Esparta's with him. Esparta can't have this, so he tells Vaughn to let him buy some time just this once. He comes face to face with the dragon, and he uses his giant wall to separate himself from the beast. The wall collapses onto the dragon, so Esparta says that this should buy them just enough time. Vaughn is amazed, but he also thinks that Esparta is being way too casual. He tells Esparta to run instead of just walking, but Esparta says that running is hard on the bones. Kamsin assures Vaughn that he will stay by Esparta's side so he can run back to the village. Vaughn starts running, but the village is still really far away. The adventurers are having a hard time as well, so Vaughn determines that he will need to buy them more time. Vaughn decides to call in his favor from Panamera, so he tells her to pin the dragon down the next time she gets the chance. If she can hold it down with her magic, then the others can fire all their arrows to finish the job. They need some time to prepare the crossbows, but the dragon's already back up. Luckily, Dee and his men arrive just in time, and they charge right at the beast. Vaughn points out that there are only 3 of them, but Dee assures them that they will be fine. They have the weapons that Vaughn made them, so they are confident that they can win. Dee and his men confront the dragon, but the dragon is too powerful. They're in bad shape as the dragon gets ready to end their lives, but Esparta rescues them with his wall. Vaughn says that they're ready now, so he instructs the knights to get to safety. He then tells Panamera that it's her turn, so she prepares her Flare Blast attack. This attack is insanely powerful, so the dragon is unable to move. Vaughn then tells everyone to fire all the arrows, and they rain down on the dragon. Everyone waits to see if the battle is finally over, because there's no telling what will happen. Dee approaches it, but it's somehow still alive. It tries to attack him, so Dee lands the finishing blow. They finally win the battle, so Vaughn tells everyone to raise their voices in victory. Everyone begins to cheer, and the girls arrive to see if Vaughn's okay. Panamera commends Vaughn for giving great orders, and she congratulates him on slaying the dragon. Regular villages would have been wiped off the map, but Vaughn and his heroes are not regular. Esparta is an incredible mage, and Dee was able to chop the dragon's head off with one strike. She says that Vaughn and his group are very special, and Vaughn says that he's proud to call them his friends. Panamera can't believe that Vaughn's arrows were able to pierce the dragon's scales, but Vaughn still thinks he needs to upgrade them a whole lot more. It took way too long to defeat the dragon, so he wants the crossbows to be able to fire 10 bolts in rapid succession. Panamera says that it's time to have a dragon slaying ceremony, but Vaughn doesn't even know what that is. Panamera explains that it's a celebration, and the most distinguished person in the battle receives the title of Dragon Slayer. Panamera says that this honor will go to Dee, and he will be known as a Dragon Slayer from now on. Afterwards, Vaughn gathers everyone in the village to honor the deeds of those who contributed the most. Panamera tells everyone that most villages would have been wiped out. Even most fortress cities would have been destroyed, but this small village survived, and they didn't have any casualties. She then goes on to list the biggest contributors. Esparta is one of them, because his incredible elemental magic assisted them in pinning down the dragon. Dee is another one, because he landed the decisive blow. Finally, she credits Vaughn, and the entire crowd cheers. His knowledge, decisiveness, and clever use of his magic has made this village much stronger. Vaughn also led the charge in this battle, so everyone honors him. Panamera thinks about how she's met many people on her journey, but she can't think of anyone like Vaughn. She was born into a long line of knights in the royal capital, but she really stuck out when her aptitude for magic became known. She was quickly handed off to the country that gave the best return for her, and her grueling training began. Her training was so harsh that it made her want to end it all, but she never gave up. She even sacrificed sleep to study in her quest to become squad commander. Eventually, she reached her goal at just 16 years old. After that, she fought in several battles and earned enough glory to be made a noble. Her emperor was very pleased with her performance, so after 6 years, she was given the title of Viscountess. One day, Count Ferdinando revealed his plan to have Art marry the lord of some remote land. He brought his daughter in, and that was when Panamera first met Art. Art was really nervous about getting married, so Panamera assured her that she would reject the guy if he wasn't a good person. Art still felt terrible because she could tell that she was being forced out of the castle. She felt like she was unwanted, but Panamera gave her some comfort. She pointed out that all of Art's siblings were married, so Art was the only one left. Panamera felt a lot of anxiety when she left her home, so she could relate with Art. She realizes now that all that worrying was for nothing. After meeting Vaughn, the once timid Art became more confident. It's all thanks to Vaughn, so Panamera says that meeting someone like him is a breath of fresh air. Panamera has made her decision, so she announces that she wants to make an alliance with Vaughn. She can tell that Vaughn hasn't received any help from his father, so she assures him that if he allies himself with her, she will give him all the support he needs. She will help protect the village, and Vaughn won't have to worry about Ferdinando's knights attacking the village. Vaughn is surprised at first, but this is a great offer. It will turn enemies into allies, and it will help them financially. Panamera points out that Vaughn upgraded this village in such a short amount of time, so he should set his sights even higher. If he forges an alliance with her, then the nobles of the kingdom will soon learn that Vaughn is her sworn friend. Vaughn thinks about how he's been completely cut off by his father, so this is a great opportunity that he may never get again. Vaughn doesn't want to waste it, so he accepts Panamera's offer. A while later, Esparta says that he has a suggestion now that Vaughn has made such sturdy ramparts around the village. They are very safe now, so he thinks that Vaughn should turn his attention to city planning. He wants Vaughn to aim for a city that can hold 10,000 people, so he will have to make this an attractive place for new residents. Jessa and Till explains that Bell and Rango have returned with some people from the Chamber of Commerce. They said that they would buy the materials from the dragon, so Vaughn is ready to get to work. They will sell the materials so they can make a city that everyone can enjoy living in. Vaughn goes to look at the dragon, and he wonders how much the merchants from the Chamber of Commerce will be willing to pay. Belle and Rango point out that the dragon's in really good condition, so Vaughn will probably get at least 100 platinum. Vaughn then thinks about how 1 platinum is worth 100 million yen. So 100 platinum would mean that this dragon is worth 10 billion yen. The merchants are ready to make their offer, and they plead for Vaughn to sell the materials to them. They say that they will pay the highest price, but they only offer 60 platinum. Vaughn goes to consult with the brothers, and they say that the offer is terrible. These materials are the highest quality, so 60 platinum is an insult. The merchants call the brothers fools, and they remind them that they're also part of the Chamber of Commerce. They should be working together to get the lowest price, so the merchants whisper to the brothers that they should play along. Unfortunately for them, Vaughn can hear everything they're saying. The brothers reject the merchant's plan because it's their aim to always do things fairly. Their motto is to do good business regardless of who they're dealing with, because they believe that it will lead to even greater profits in the future. The merchants are furious, and they are sure that the brothers will get kicked out of the Chamber of Commerce when their president finds out. Vaughn wonders if the brothers are really okay with this, so they say that this was the only way. Vaughn comes up with a great idea and says that they should just start their own trading company. The brothers are shocked because this is not an easy thing to do. There are 3 conditions that need to be met in order to establish a new trading company. First, they must pay the Merchant Guild's registration fee. Secondly, they must own their own shop. Finally, they must get an endorsement from a titled noble. The first 2 are simple enough, but the real issue is the last one. There's only one person with a title that might help them, so Vaughn goes to see Panamera. Vaughn is shocked when she agrees because he points out that it could cause some trouble for her. She would be competing with the Merry Chamber of Commerce, which is backed by the royal family, so they could turn against her. Panamera doesn't care about that because she can see how it would benefit her. If she becomes a founder of a small trading company as a newly appointed noble, it could elevate her status even more. She has no knights or land of her own, so if she wants to climb the social ladder, she will need to do things that will get people talking. Vaughn points out that if that's the case, then she should tell everyone that she defeated the dragon. That will definitely get people talking about her, and best of all, Vaughn's family won't find out that he was involved. Unfortunately, Panamera says that it won't work. Dragons rarely get slain, so when it happens, there's a huge investigation. People will want every detail about how the dragon was defeated, and all the answers would just lead back to Vaughn anyway. This is terrible news, because Vaughn fears that he will be sent away. Panamera says that there's one way to avoid this, and that's for Vaughn to get a title himself. She then explains that all nobles have a title. She worked her way up from knight, which is the lowest title, and it took forever. Vaughn is the son of Marquisto, so he would probably start off as a baron. All Vaughn will have to do is declare that he was the one that defeated the dragon. Vaughn is really against this idea because it would make him stand out, and that's the last thing he wants. Panamera says that it would be great because he would be famous for being the 8-year-old that beat a dragon. That's a great achievement, and it would definitely earn him a title. Panamera understands his hesitation because when she earned her title, she also gained many enemies. However, in her case, she simply burned them to ash. Panamera tells him not to worry because if any enemies come after him, he can just shoot them with his crossbows. Leaving plenty of bodies behind will surely keep people from opposing him. Vaughn points out that if he claims a victory for himself, then she won't be able to use it in her own bid for a promotion. Panamera is insulted because she doesn't think she did anything to make an 8-year-old worry about her. Vaughn takes it all back as he sees just how terrifying Panamera can be. She assures him that she can handle her promotion herself so he can have the glory of defeating the dragon. When Vaughn returns to the village, the brothers are delighted to hear that Panamera will endorse them. This means that they can start their own trading company, and the guys couldn't be happier. They get right to business, and they ask Vaughn if he would sell them the dragon materials. They want to repay Vaughn for everything he has done, so they offer to pay 130 platinum. That's a great price, so they make the deal. It's time for them to go to the royal capital to sell it all, but all the carriages are gone. The brothers are horrified to hear this, and they are told that the merchants just left with all of them. Panamera arrives and explains that the merchants did it on purpose. If the brothers don't have any way to transport the goods, then they will have no choice but to do what the merchants want. Vaughn tells them not to worry because he can just make a new carriage for them. They will still need a horse to pull the carriage, so Panamera says that they can use her warhorse. Her horses are well trained and their speed is unmatched. Elsewhere, the merchants have a good laugh as they say that the brothers will come crawling back to them. Just then they are horrified as they see something coming towards them at rapid speed. It's Panamera and the brothers, and their carriage blows right past them. The merchants wonder why Panamera is with them, and they fear the worst. They realize that with the cooperation of a noble, the brothers could start their own trading company. At the royal capital, Panamera goes to speak with King Dino. She explains that she wants him to grant a title to someone, but he points out that there's no one else here. Panamera explains that the person is the lord of a remote village, and he is currently safeguarding it. Dino can only wonder why Panamera would recommend such a person, so she explains all of Vaughn's great deeds. She says that he has accomplished so much, but what's even more promising is his potential. Dino wonders what kind of accomplishment she's talking about because he doesn't expect much from a remote village. Of course, he's shocked when Panamera reveals that Vaughn defeated a forest dragon. He wonders if this lord is an elemental mage, but Panamera says that he's not. Dino is then even more surprised when she reveals that Vaughn's aptitude is for production magic. Panamera has Dino's attention, so he would like to hear more about what Vaughn has done. Panamera explains that Vaughn protected the village from bandits on the first day he arrived at the village. He then used his production magic to surround the village with walls and a moat. Vaughn made even more upgrades, and that is when he defeated the dragon. Panamera then explains how she pinned the dragon down so Vaughn and his subordinates could land the final blow. This is all very hard for Dino to believe, so Panamera reveals the dragon fang that she brought. This is more than enough proof, and Panamera even says that he should visit the village to see the improvements. Dino's very intrigued now, so he says that he would like to meet Vaughn as soon as possible. Her mission is a great success, so she announces to everyone that Vaughn has received the title of Baron. Word quickly begins to spread, and everyone realizes that this is the same Vaughn that was said to be a prodigy. Everyone is now talking about how he defeated a dragon, so Panamera says that things are about to get interesting. A while later, we see that Vaughn has made the homes of the villagers a lot fancier. Vaughn has been putting in a lot of work, so his city building is going smoothly. To bolster their defenses, Vaughn also created 2 giant towers. He named one Oligo Tower and the other Grape Tower. Towers serve as symbols of a settlement, and they will allow them to detect enemies from really far away. Vaughn's stomach grumbles from hunger, so he says that they should eat at the top of one of the towers. Till's egg sandwiches are a big hit, and everyone enjoys the meal with a great view of the village. Esparta points out that they have proper buildings and facilities now, so it might be time to start calling this village a town. Everyone thinks it should be called Vaughn Town, but Vaughn hates that idea. He wonders what Lady Art thinks, but she has something else on her mind. Instead of calling her Lady Art, she says that she wants Vaughn to just call her Art. It would make her feel much closer to him, so Vaughn agrees. Till wants to celebrate how well everything is going, so she reveals that she made a cake. Vaughn can only wonder where she got the ingredients, so Till explains that it was all thanks to the brothers. After they set up shop in the village, she was able to buy the ingredients from them. Vaughn is amazed that so much is going on, and he believes that this place is turning into a pretty nice village. Vaughn wonders why Till isn't eating any cake, so she explains that she got carried away with her baking. She has been eating cake every day, and her weight has skyrocketed. Jess then camps and points out that there are people at the front gate. The people wonder if this is Seato Village, but Vaughn has no clue what that is. Esparta explains that a group of people called the Seato lived on this land before there was a village here. The people say that they come from a neighboring village and they're in distress. They are taxed heavily, but they have no young people to do the work. They can hardly make ends meet, so they came here to ask for help. Vaughn wonders what happened to all their young people, so they explain that they were taken by the Count. The Count is preparing for war, so he took all their young people to bolster his forces. Vaughn knows that he shouldn't be welcoming people from other domains, but he can tell that they risk their lives to come here. Vaughn then surprises everyone when he says that they can relocate here if they want. They point out that they don't have money, but Vaughn says that it won't be a problem because they won't have to pay any taxes for a while. He says that they have everything they need, and they wonder if this place is heaven. There are only 10 of them that made the trip, but there are 300 more back at their village. Vaughn wonders if one house for each family will be enough for them, and this sounds like a dream to them. They wonder if it's really okay to accept such kindness, and Vaughn tells them not to worry about it. He says that he will send them back with carriages to bring all their things, but they explain that they have cows to carry their stuff. Vaughn is delighted to hear this because the cows will be able to produce milk. With that, they will be able to make cheese, butter, and so much more. It could be a major new industry for their village, so Vaughn can't wait. A while later, we see that Vaughn sent the adventurers to help get the rest of the villagers. One villager says that she was against relocating because they're just going from a remote village to an even more remote village. Ortho assures her that they will be okay because Vaughn's village is more like a paradise. When they return, Vaughn welcomes everyone to see a Toe village. He can tell that they are exhausted, so he says that they can eat some of the barbecue and get a good night's rest in the homes that he prepared for them. They wonder if it's really okay to eat this delicious food, so Vaughn tells them to have their fill. The feast begins, and everyone is so amazed by the delicious food that it brings them to tears. It was hard work preparing this barbecue and all the houses for 300 people, but Vaughn says it was all worth it. Before they rest, the people say that they would like to work. They want to make a living for themselves, and Vaughn remembers that they're probably riddled with anxiety. Vaughn assures them that there's plenty of work. He needs some people to run some shops and cultivate some new fields. The chief explains that Vaughn has changed so much in the village, so they will do everything they can to help the newcomers. The newcomers are hesitant to accept so much kindness, but Vaughn tells them not to worry. To help ease their concern, Vaughn has to bring out all the cake she made. Vaughn says that they will soon have a trading company in this village, and they will be able to develop even further. The village will be a place where everyone can enjoy their lives, so Vaughn tells them to sit back and relax. The villagers are incredibly grateful, and they begin to realize that they can really live here. Vaughn is happy to see this, because instead of being worried, they can now just focus on enjoying their lives. Esparta points out that they're still far away from being able to handle 10,000 people, so Vaughn says that he will keep working hard on his city building. A while later, Vaughn finishes a long day of work, and Esparta tells him that it's time to study. Vaughn can't believe that his day isn't over, so Esparta reminds him that there's a lot to do. Just then, the adventurers arrive and immediately apologize. They were supposed to avoid finding the dungeon because the village isn't ready, but it couldn't be helped. They discovered the dungeon entrance, and Esparta says that it must be reported immediately. There's no other choice in this matter, so Vaughn will have to send a messenger to the royal capital. With the discovery of a dungeon, adventurers will flee to the village, and Vaughn's father will learn about everything. The adventurers apologize once again, but Vaughn says that it can't be helped. Vaughn determines that Zara was the one that discovered the dungeon because he's a scout in their group. Because of this, Vaughn says that he should be the messenger who reports it to the capital. As for the other two, Vaughn wants them to explore the area around the dungeon. Ortho is hesitant to let Zara go to the capital alone, but he quickly changes his mind when Vaughn says that he will give them one large gold piece for doing so. Vaughn feels bad for Zara, so he gives him a mithril short sword so he can feel better. Vaughn used up all the mithril ore, so this weapon is pretty precious. On his way to the capital, Zara stumbles upon a group of monsters after they just attacked a carriage. Normally, these giants would prove to be a challenge for Zara, but he's much more confident now that he has a mithril blade. Zara immediately takes out one of them and tells them that they should quit while they're ahead. They don't retreat, so Zara has no choice but to eliminate them all. Just then, a girl named Flameria thanks Zara for saving her. Zara strikes her as someone famous, so she would like to know who he is. Zara introduces himself and explains that he's just a humble adventurer. Flameria explains that she will be walking back to the capital now, so she offers to pay Zara back later with the date. Zara informs her that he's also going to the capital, so she can hop on his horse. Flameria doesn't want to be a bother, but Zara insists. To make her more comfortable, Zara says that his horse will be much happier carrying a nice girl like her instead of a guy like him. He wonders why she's going to the capital, so she explains her not so happy backstory. Her father was a baron, but he lost his life in battle and his land was conquered. Because of this, she has to look for work as a maid in a noble's house. Zara says that he's currently living in a remote village, so she should come with him. He is sure that she will be able to find work there, but more importantly, he will be able to protect her. Flameria is shocked by his kindness, and she takes him up on his offer. Back at the village, Vaughn thinks about what he must do now that the dungeon was discovered. Adventurers will flood to the village, so he will have to build a separate outpost for them to stay in. Esparta thinks it's a good idea, and he says that Vaughn should name a governor to watch over it. Vaughn will be staying in the village, so it would be smart to have someone oversee the new outpost. Vaughn chooses Esparta, so Esparta says that he should also establish a new chivalric order to keep peace in the outpost. Vaughn agrees, so he chooses Dee and his knights to be the chivalric order in Seatow, and they will establish a Sparta chivalric order for the outpost. Vaughn goes to create the outpost, and he has some villagers help him. Everything is going well, so at this rate, the outpost will be done in a month. As everyone works, Vaughn gets an idea. He tells Dee to assess all the workers and see if any of them will be a good fit for their chivalric order. Dee chooses a few of them to join the Seatow chivalric order, but they reveal that they have already been recruited to Esparta's. Vaughn is horrified to hear this because Esparta is already way ahead of him. Just then, Zara returns after filing the report with the royal capital. Vaughn wonders who the girl is, so Zara explains that she's someone he met on his journey. Flameria introduces herself and says that Zara rescued her when she was attacked. The humble Zara doesn't take all the credit, and he says that it was thanks to the short sword that Vaughn made him. Flameria thinks very highly of Zara because to her, he was more wonderful than the heroes of legend. The two of them are clearly very close now, so Vaughn realizes what's going on. Just then, a bunch of strangers stampede towards our heroes, and Vaughn determines that the apocalypse has started. Zara tells him not to worry because those people are just adventurers coming for the dungeon. When Zara told the guild, a bunch of idiots set out for the village in search of riches. These guys are pretty crazy, so Vaughn says that they're like villains in a post-apocalyptic world. They aren't so bad though, because they're actually worried about Vaughn's group and telling them to get to safety. They seem pretty nice, but Flameria says that their faces are scary. They warn our heroes that they might be in danger if a monster appeared, but Vaughn explains that they aren't too far from their village. The guys are all stunned because it doesn't look like a village at all. The place is surrounded by giant ramparts, so they wonder how a small village could even make them. Vaughn shows them how he did it, and the adventurers go crazy. They have never seen magic like this before, and they're even more shocked when they find out that Vaughn is the lord of this land. They say that they heard about a brat that got sent away to a remote village, but Dee doesn't like them insulting Vaughn. The adventurers are quick to pick a fight, but Dee quickly puts them in their place. From then on, the Mohawks only ever showed respect to everyone. A while later, Ortho and the others return from the dungeon. Zara introduces them to Flameria and says that they're heading to the inn. Ortho and the others are in complete shock because they can't believe that Zara found a girlfriend. Vaughn wonders if he should build a house for the new couple, and Ortho can't believe that Zara is so far ahead of him. As for the dungeon, the adventurers explain that there are hardly any monsters in the area around it. However, the entrance is in a deep crevice, so it's in a pretty dangerous spot. Vaughn wonders how far it is, so they explain that it's a 2 or 3 hour carriage ride away. Pluriel goes on to say that the area around most dungeons is very harsh. People can usually build small bases nearby, but no one could ever build anything full scale. Vaughn can tell what she's about to say, and he's not amused. Pluriel doesn't hold back and says that Vaughn could be the first person to build a big base really close to a dungeon. Vaughn tries to say that he's just a kid, so he can't go to such a dangerous place. Pluriel doesn't back down, as she points out that the adventurers will keep him safe. Vaughn doesn't want to go because he wants to keep enjoying his fun city building inside the village. Vaughn can't dodge his responsibility, so he says that he has some demands. They will have to bring him some sweets, and he wants his friends to come along. Dee and Esparta will be busy, so they will have to stay, but he wants to bring Till Campson and Art. Vaughn makes several more demands, and he's sure that the adventurers will give up on trying to get him to go. Unfortunately for him, Pluriel says that they will make the preparations. The next day, they all set out so Vaughn can build a base near the dungeon. On their way, the group encounters a giant troll. The new adventurers don't waste a single moment, and they eliminate it. Their journey is a long one, and the girls admire the scenery. Vaughn isn't looking forward to all the work, but he's at least glad that the girls are enjoying themselves. They will be arriving soon, but Vaughn tells the carriage to stop when he spots something shocking. They have arrived at the deep crevice, and Vaughn is horrified to see how casual the adventurers are about it. The adventurers are crossing it like it's not a big deal, and Vaughn realizes what's going on. Adventurers are fearless, and they don't seem to understand the concept of safety first. Vaughn calls a meeting and tells everyone that they will have to rethink how they see dangerous places like this. He wants them to start trying to predict danger and manage risk. Zara isn't listening, and he continues to dance on the log, connecting the two sides of the crevice. Vaughn shocks him with reality as he makes him think about what would happen if he kicked the log. He says that Zara's life would meet a terrible end, and all the adventurers finally understand. With that out of the way, Vaughn amazes everyone by creating a sturdy bridge. This leads them to the dungeon entrance, but there is a problem. There isn't much space, and Vaughn is supposed to build a base here. He will just have to adapt, so he asks the adventurers what they would like for him to build. They want a tavern in their base and an amusement park. Of course, Vaughn rejects their ideas, and he gets to work. First, he creates a gate for the dungeon entrance to keep the dungeon monsters from getting out. Next, he builds a facility for the adventurers to stay in. Eventually, the base is finished, and everyone is amazed by the giant building. The first floor has a rest area and a storage space. The second has a cafeteria, and the third has a sleeping area. To top it all off, Vaughn even built a terrace overlooking the area so the adventurers could have somewhere to relax. Everyone loves the base because it gives them somewhere to rest in between their trips to the dungeon. Vaughn even built water tanks and rain catchers on the roof so they can always have water. Vaughn's work is done, so he leaves the adventurers to manage the base on their own. He tells Ortho to watch over them, so Ortho promises to do a good job. It's getting dark, so Vaughn says that he must leave. The adventurers joke about him being afraid of the dark, so Vaughn thinks about destroying the entire base. Just then, Art spots some mithril ore nearby, and everyone compliments her for finding it. When they return to the village, Vaughn is terrified when he sees that Esparta is waiting for him. Vaughn knows that he's in big trouble because he stayed out way past his curfew. Esparta says that they need to talk, and Vaughn couldn't be more scared. He begs for the others to help him, but they have nothing to offer. Vaughn says that it's all the adventurer's fault, so Ortho has to help him. Ortho tries to explain what happened, but Esparta just tells him to be quiet. Esparta takes Vaughn away, and all our hero can do is apologize. A while later, Vaughn walks with Art, and she admires how wonderful the village is. She just came back after returning home for a while, and Vaughn wonders if she would like to live here. Vaughn can tell that she's hesitant to answer, so he explains that he wants to hear what she wants. He tells her to put her father's wishes aside and put her own feelings first. Art makes her decision and says that she would like to get engaged with Vaughn. She's embarrassed at first because she didn't mean to let it slip out, and she's glad to see that this made Vaughn happy. Afterwards, the brothers return from the royal capital. They finish setting up their new trading company, and they owe it all to Vaughn. Just as they promised, they give our hero the 30 platinum. Vaughn hands it off to Till, but this is her first time handling such a large amount of platinum. As for Panamera, Vaughn is told that she wants to speak with Count Ferdinando. She said that allying with Vaughn will be more interesting than sticking with the Count, so Vaughn thinks that she wants to live in this village. That isn't the case, because her plan is to be given land nearby. Just then, the brothers reveal that they have brought Vaughn a masterpiece that they found in the capital. Vaughn is amazed when he sees that it's a machine bow capable of firing up to 10 shots in a row. It's the latest tech in the royal capital, and Vaughn is delighted. With this weapon, he will be able to create new crossbows to defend the village. As Vaughn analyzes how the bow works, Art points out that this is the happiest she has ever seen him. Vaughn amazes her by recreating the bow with his magic, but the one he creates doesn't work. Art is shocked because she realizes that even Vaughn can fail sometimes. Vaughn humbly explains that he fails all the time. Aside from his magic, Vaughn says that he can't really pride himself in anything. Art assures him that that isn't true because he has many other amazing talents. He's great with the sword and really good at studying. Art, on the other hand, says that she truly has nothing. Vaughn wants to help, so he says that he will introduce her to Esparta and the commander of his chivalric order. This reminds Vaughn to ask Art what her magical aptitude is. This is a traumatic subject for her, so Vaughn says that she doesn't have to answer. Art is very comfortable with him, so she reveals that her aptitude is for marionette magic. Just like Vaughn's production magic, marionette magic is considered useless by nobles. Vaughn knows better than anyone how wrong they can be, so he says that he would like to see her magic. People with marionette magic are very rare, and Art is the first person he has ever met who can use it. Vaughn creates a doll for her and asks her to try and move it. Art gives them a demonstration, and Vaughn is amazed. He calls it incredible magic, and he says that it has limitless potential. Till agrees with him, and she suggests that Vaughn make more puppets for her. She thinks Art should put on a show for the entire village because she is sure that it will make everyone really happy. Vaughn is on board, and he says that he will make a puppet out of the mithril ore that Art found. Art is hesitant because her magic isn't fit for showing off to others. Vaughn points out that many people told him the same thing about his magic. They told him that it was unfortunate that he had production magic, and his father even called him a failure. Vaughn was still able to make a lot of people really happy with his magic, and he is sure that Art can do the same. This shocks Art to her core because she always thought that she was worthless. However, if Vaughn thinks that she can do it, she promises to give it a try. That night, the villagers wonder why Vaughn summoned everyone to the center of the village. Vaughn welcomes everyone and reveals that they will put on a show using Art's magic. The villagers wonder what kind of magic it will be, and they're amazed when Art makes a doll move around. It's almost like it's alive, but something is wrong. They realize that she's using marionette magic, and they point out that someone tried to take out the royal family using it. Marionette magic has a terrible reputation, and Art hears them talking about it. She begins to lose control and thinks about how marionette magic is called the magic of vile criminals. People are discriminated against for using it, so Vaughn realizes that he needs to do something. He warms up the crowd in a lighthearted way, and he gives Art a reassuring look. Art's confidence is restored, so she begins her performance. Everyone is moved by the dolls dancing, and Vaughn says that Art's marionette magic brings life into lifeless objects. It truly is wonderful magic, and it brings tears to some of the people in the audience. Art is completely exhausted after the performance, and everyone is left in shock. They don't have any words to express what they just saw, so everyone cheers for Art. Art was really scared at first, but now everyone is complimenting her magic. Vaughn is really proud of her, and Art breaks down in tears in his arms. The next day, Vaughn receives some urgent news. A carriage bearing the royal family's crest is heading their way. Panamera arrives with the carriage, and she wonders how everyone is doing. Vaughn explains that he and Art have gotten much closer, and Art says hello to her old friend. Panamera is stunned, and she wonders what kind of trick Vaughn pulled. Art has changed so much, and it's only been a short time since she came to the village. Vaughn simply explains that he told Art how wonderful her magic really is. Just then, Panamera remembers why she came. She tells Vaughn to bow his head because he's about to meet his majesty. Vaughn takes a knee, and he's greeted by the king of Sideria, named Dino. His chancellor is by his side, and his name is Aperta. Dino explains that Vaughn has officially become a baron and joined the lower ranks of nobility. He says that Vaughn must dedicate himself to the benefit of their nation, and Vaughn says that he will. Dino has also heard about the dungeon they found, so he will be sending someone to gather information. Finally, Dino brings up how Vaughn defeated a forest dragon. It's an incredible feat, so Dino has come to confirm it in person. Vaughn promises to answer all of his questions about it, but he has one request. He will show Dino how everything happened, but there's a good chance that it will still be hard for him to believe. That is why Vaughn's only request is that Dino keep an open mind. Dino's very intrigued, so he makes the promise. Vaughn takes the king to see all of Cedo Village, along with all the upgrades he made. Dino can't believe what he's seeing, so he asks for Aperta's opinion. Aperta acknowledges that everything is well made, but he sees one problem. The crossbows are good for attacking small foes at a limited distance, but they're very inconvenient to use. Vaughn knows better though, so he says that he can give them a demonstration. He has Kamsin fire an arrow into the forest, and the king is shocked by the incredible force generated by the crossbow. It's capable of massive damage, and it even fired 2 bolts in rapid succession. Pulling off an attack like that without an elite archer or a mage is astonishing. The king then says that he's also curious about Vaughn's star-shaped ramparts. Vaughn explains that its shape allows them to attack enemies from multiple directions. This just adds to their incredible defenses, because those bolts raining down from every angle would be terrifying. Panamera says that their defense is incredibly effective against all enemies, except the ones that can fly. Vaughn has created something to solve that problem as well, but he hasn't tested it yet. Aperta is confused because Vaughn is talking like he makes these weapons himself. Vaughn humbly explains that it's because he does. The king is in such disbelief that he thinks Vaughn is lying to him. Dino reminds Vaughn that he said he wouldn't tolerate any lies or falsehoods. Vaughn assures him that he's telling the truth, and Panamera says that Dino's in for even more of a shock when he hears the rest. Aperta points out that the structure of the crossbows is quite unique, so he would like to know who came up with the design. Of course, this was also Vaughn, so then Aperta wonders who was in charge of developing the village. This scale of development would take several years, so he assumes that it was some genius builder. Vaughn explains that he built it all, and the villagers helped by gathering resources. Aperta then wonders how many years it took to build the ramparts, but Vaughn explains that it took a few months. This is impossible for the king to fathom, so Panamera suggests that Vaughn give them a demonstration. They head to the lake so Vaughn can show them, and the king is even more amazed by what happens on the way there. The villagers are all really happy, and it becomes very clear that they all love Vaughn. Vaughn is able to have casual conversations with every villager, and this is unheard of. They run into the crazy adventurers, and the king can't believe that Vaughn gets along with them as well. They arrive at the lake, and the king is in disbelief once again. Dino wonders if he's losing his mind because the lake is filled with apkalu. They're incredibly rare, and Dino thought that he would never see one in his entire life. Aperta confirms that the king is not going crazy because this rare species is here, just living out in the open. It's unbelievable, and the two of them have never seen a sight like this before. Vaughn comes up with an idea, and he asks Sparta if they should build another rampart behind the lake. Sparta gets to work immediately, and he creates the wall of dirt. Vaughn then follows it by turning it into a rampart with his magic. Vaughn is ready to show them whatever else they want to see next, but the guys are speechless. Afterwards, Litavessa determines that he must show respect to the king, so he introduces himself. After they get acquainted, Litavessa says that he wants to give Dino a gift as a sign of their new friendship. He gives him a shiny rock, and the king is more shocked than ever. This rock is actually orichalcum, which is the legendary metal known as the Metal of the Gods. Dino never expected to lay his eyes on such a rare resource, and he can't believe it. Aperta says that if they forge a sword with this orichalcum, it would cost over 100 platinum. The king corrects him by saying that it would be priceless, and it would instantly become a national treasure. Vaughn turns it into a sword without a second thought, and he realizes that the guys are watching. He tries to hide this part of his ability, but it's too late. Vaughn doesn't want to confess to being able to make weapons, so the king says that he's willing to pay Vaughn any amount he wants to answer honestly. Vaughn only has one request, and that is for Dino to grant him permanent residency inside this village. He wants Dino to promise that no matter how impressed he is by his abilities, he will never send him to a different land. Dino can't understand why, because if Vaughn came to the capital, he would be treated like a legend. Vaughn says that his only concern is who would protect the people here if he left this land. Creating a place where people can live without major concerns is his duty as a lord. That is why Vaughn says that he has an obligation to make this land prosper. Dino says that it would be a shame to leave Vaughn's talents all the way out here, but he agrees to Vaughn's demands. He wonders if Vaughn will still work with them if he needs something, and Vaughn says that he will. Dino is pleased, and he declares that he will no longer be shocked by Vaughn's abilities. He has decided to stop viewing him as a child because he has shown what he's capable of. Vaughn is relieved that he will get to stay so he can keep improving this land. The king has to head back soon, so he wants to confirm the dungeon before he leaves. The trip will take at least one entire day, so Vaughn recommends that they do it some other time. Just then, the villagers begin to scream in terror because a dragon has appeared. Vaughn immediately springs into action and tells the villagers to send word to the adventurers. Vaughn looks for the dragon, and it appears before them. This dragon is no ordinary one, as our heroes realize that it's a wyvern. To make things even more complicated, it seems that a mage is controlling it. Wyvern are typically pack animals, so one would never attack a village on its own. There could be another threat nearby, and the king determines that this is the work of the kingdom of Yeleneta. Vaughn is shocked because he can't understand why Yeleneta would be attacking the village. There's a good chance that this wyvern has a group of elite knights with it, so the king tells Vaughn to be careful. The wyvern is too high to be attacked by the crossbows, so Vaughn says that they will have to deploy his prototype. In the forest, we see that some knights are headed to the village. Their wyvern is already scouting it, and they will be there soon. The person leading them can't believe that he was chosen to lead the knights in their invasion of such a remote village. He is Prince Unimog, the 8th son of the Yeleneta kingdom. He says that this mission is beneath him, but the king chose him to lead this operation because of its importance. Yeleneta kingdom has long been rivals with the neighboring kingdom of Scuderia. The Yeleneta king said that it's now time to settle things with Scuderia once and for all. Unimog still thinks it's a waste of his time because conquering a remote village will be like a walk in the park. When they arrive, however, they're all shocked to see what the village looks like. It's surrounded by giant walls, and they wonder how such a tiny village could build that way. Unimog refuses to believe that they built a fortress city in such a short time. Instead, he's sure that they merely built a facade that makes it look like a fortress city. He declares that it's time to take their land, but the knights are worried that the fortress might be real. Unimog yells at them for trying to defy him, and he says that this fake fortress is all for show. He commands them to destroy the fake ramparts, so they begin bashing the gate. Unfortunately, they're unable to make a single dent, and Unimog is left in disbelief. Vaughn happily greets them and introduces himself as the lord of this village. He wonders what brought them all this way from Yeleneta, and Unimog is shocked. Vaughn is too young to be a lord, and he can't understand how he knows they're from Yeleneta. Vaughn explains that he was just bluffing that he knew, and Unimog just confirmed it for him. Unimog points out that this village didn't have ramparts before, so he demands to know how Vaughn turned it into a fortress city. Vaughn simply explains that he and the villagers worked together to make ramparts and facilities. Unimog refuses to believe his lies, so he tells Vaughn to come down so he can teach him a lesson. He reminds him that his wyvern can attack from the sky, so the giant ramparts won't save him. He tells a knight to instruct a mage on the wyvern to attack Vaughn. The knight fears that it will get attacked back, but Unimog doesn't care. He reminds the knight that the wyvern is a dragon, and there's no way it can lose. He tells Vaughn that it's time for him to learn how terrifying dragons can be, and he laughs like a maniac. Vaughn isn't worried though, and he tells Panamera to use the prototype. Panamera orders a guard to fire the new weapon, and it unleashes a powerful attack. It rains damage down onto the wyvern and rips it right out of the sky. Unimog is left in shock because they use shuriken to attack the dragon. Vaughn explains that shuriken are thin and light, so he stuffed them inside a bomb. That was the first time they've ever used it, but it seemed pretty successful. The Chancellor is stunned because that was an incredible amount of force. That one attack alone could prove to be as much of a threat as an elemental mage. Unimog can't believe his eyes when he sees that the king of Scuderia is in this remote village. Vaughn wonders if the attackers want to continue, but the knights are ready to surrender. Unimog calls them all cowards and demands for them to protect him. Vaughn sees that this guy still has plenty of fight left in him, so he tells Panamera to give him a warning. She fires a bolt near him and warns that the next one won't miss. The king is very impressed with Vaughn, and he says that Marquise has quite the son. The Chancellor then explains that Marquise drove Vaughn out of his home. Dino's not surprised, because Marquise probably never imagined that someone with a low-ranking magical aptitude would be capable of such great feats. Dino says that when they return to the capital, they will have to reconsider their research into magical aptitudes. Afterwards, Unimog is interrogated by the Chancellor. Unimog refuses to answer any questions, so Panamera threatens to gorge his eyes out. Unimog squeals in terror, and he says that he will cooperate. He reveals that Yeleneta Kingdom has been planning this invasion for several years. Their plan was to start by conquering this village in Marquise Ferdio's land. They assumed that taking control of this remote village would be easy. They plan to attack other territories, and at this very moment a separate force is attacking the city that they're really after. It's the fortress city called Scudet. Panamera tells all this to Dino, and the Chancellor thinks that they should rush back to the capital. He thinks they should gather their knights and ride to the defense of Scudet City. Dino agrees with him, but there's one thing he would like to add. He turns to Vaughn and requests that he join them in their defense of Scudet. Vaughn is shocked, and he thinks about how normally he wouldn't be able to say no in this situation. However, Vaughn knows that he must defend his own village. Vaughn is honored by Dino's request, but he says that leaving his village while it's still developing would be the same as abandoning it. The Chancellor is surprised because the village already has weapons that can bring down a wyvern with one attack. It even has weapons that can bring down armored lizards, so he can't understand how Vaughn can say that it's still developing. Vaughn explains that he's barely completed a tenth of what he envisions. There's still much more he would like to make for the village, and he's not even close to being done. Panamera is really amused, and she can't wait to see what Vaughn makes that's even more incredible than what he has already done. However, she says that Vaughn should accept the king's request. Every noble must come to the nation's aid when it's in danger. Vaughn acknowledges that it's the duty of a noble, so he says that he will participate. He still has his responsibilities as a lord though, so he wants to be able to organize his troops himself. Dino allows it, so Vaughn goes to speak with the others. Vaughn asks Esparta to protect the village as its acting lord while he is gone. Esparta accepts, and he wonders if Vaughn will really be okay without him. Vaughn isn't so sure, but Esparta's the only one capable of acting as lord in his place. As for D and his chivalric order, they will be going with Vaughn. Vaughn wants Till and Campson to stay in the village where they will be safe, but they refuse. They demand to come along, so Vaughn has no choice but to accept. Just then the adventurers arrive, and they would like to accept a quest to guard Vaughn. Normally they wouldn't accept anything having to do with war, but they don't have a problem doing a job to protect Vaughn. Vaughn happily agrees, and he asks them to tell the other adventurers. To make it more enticing, he says that he will pay 1 large gold and 5 gold per person. The adventurers can't believe that he's offering so much, but Vaughn reminds them that they will be risking their lives. Zara isn't sure if he wants to go, but Vaughn says that he doesn't have a scout among his knights. He would like Zara to come along, and he warns that he won't be able to come to the barbecue if he doesn't. Zara doesn't want to miss out, so he agrees to go. Panamera has to return to report this to Count Ferdinando, but she will assemble her troops and head for Scudet City afterwards. She wonders what weapons Vaughn is planning to take, but he isn't sure. He would like to bring the stuff he created, but he can't really carry his giant crossbows the way they are now. Art says that she has a solution, so she will bring her marionette. Vaughn then gathers everyone and gives a speech. This will be their first campaign, and their mission is to defend their largest neighbor, the fortress city of Scudet. Unlike themselves, their enemy will be very experienced. However, Vaughn says that there's nothing to fear. His main goal is for everyone to return to this village safe and sound. Vaughn takes responsibility for their lives, and he will do everything in his power to protect them. When they are done, they will continue developing the village after they have their barbecue. Meanwhile, Marquise is shocked when he learns about Scudet being attacked. He knows that Scudet is impregnable, so it won't fall that easily. Marquise orders for their troops to be assembled so they can ride immediately. They will need help, so he orders emissaries to request troops for neighboring lords. Marquise is reminded that Vaughn's village is near Scudet, and he's asked if they should contact him. Marquise rejects the idea because he's sure that the village won't have any troops to dispatch. Marquise is told that Vaughn has earned the title of Baron for defeating a dragon, but he doesn't believe it. He says that Vaughn doesn't possess elemental magic, so there's no way he could defeat a dragon. Marquise doesn't want to hear any more about it, so he says that it's time for them to head to Scudet. When he arrives at the south gate, he's shocked to see that Scudet's impregnable ramparts have been destroyed. This should be impossible, but it's clear that this was done by the Wyvern squad sent by Yelinet. Marquise says that they need to withdraw to regroup, but they are spotted by the enemy. They're attacked by a weapon Marquise has never seen before, and their forces are nearly wiped out. The enemy moves in to attack again, and Marquise wonders if this is how his life will end. Just then, the enemy retreats, and Marquise can't understand what's going on. At the west gate, we see that the Wyverns are being attacked by a mysterious attacker. The Wyvern squad doesn't know what to make of it, and they desperately call for backup. This mysterious attacker turns out to be Art's marionette. Art calls it Uno, and she's controlling it from a distance. She's completely overwhelming the enemy, and they're desperately trying to fight back. Vaughn says that Art is amazing, and he didn't know that she could use her powers like this. Scudet's in really bad shape though, and no one had any idea that it could be conquered so easily. They stood no chance because the enemy used the Wyvern squads and their new weapon. The other gates are falling, so Vaughn considers trying to draw the attention of the enemy. He orders for everyone to keep up what they're doing so they can buy the knights some time to retreat. Our heroes come under attack, but Till and Campson act immediately to protect Art. All the adventurers are participating as well, and they take out another group of enemies. Vaughn is next to come under attack, but Art uses her marionette to save him. After a while, Vaughn is pleased to see that they have drawn the attention of a lot of enemies. They have bought plenty of time for the knights to escape, so Vaughn says that it's time for them to pull back. Ortho wonders if they should really run away because they actually have a chance of winning. Vaughn reminds them that it's his goal to make sure everyone returns alive. If anyone loses their life, he wouldn't be happy even if they won. No one there wants to lose their life, so they all agree to run. Afterwards, Marquise declares that they must retake Scudet. He still can't believe that they made it out alive, and he can only wonder what happened. Mercia arrives after being late, and Marquise wonders where he's been. Just then Dino shows up, and everyone bows down to him. Marquise explains that Scadet has fallen, and the Chancellor can't believe it. Marquise reveals that his knights were attacked by a new weapon, and they were nearly wiped out. Of course, the Chancellor wonders how they survived, so Marquise says that the Wyverns just stopped pursuing them. Dino's surprised, but he determines that they were most likely drawn to the West Gate by Vaughn's reinforcements. Marquise is shocked by this, and he can't believe that it was because of Vaughn. Dino reveals that Vaughn has developed his small village, and he even defeated a dragon. Marquise says that Vaughn is not an elemental mage, so there's no way this can be true. This upsets the Chancellor, so Marquise apologizes for doubting the king. Mercia can't believe that Vaughn already has a title, and Dino wonders if he's upset. Vaughn earned glory before him, so Dino assumes that he's frustrated. Mercia says that it's the opposite, because he couldn't be more proud of Vaughn. That night, Dee wonders what Vaughn will have them do next. Vaughn says that he has fulfilled his duty as a noble, but if Scadet isn't retaken, it would mean leaving a threat nearby long term. Art has never been part of a war before, but she didn't like it at all. It felt like a terrifying place where even innocent people are sacrificed. If it were up to her, she would never go back. Vaughn points out that Panamera is still involved, so they will have to continue to provide some form of help. Just then, Vaughn comes up with the perfect solution. They will develop a new weapon, and this time it will be a catapult. They will deliver some to the battlefield, so they can claim that they provided plenty of support. It's the best way to keep everyone safe, and their entire group agrees. Vaughn creates a catapult immediately, until wonders how many he will make. Vaughn says that 20 stationary ones and 5 mobile ones should be enough. Transporting so many will be a huge problem, but Vaughn comes up with another idea. Instead of trying to transport them, he will just make them on site. The next day, Vaughn dreads having to return to the battlefield. He doesn't like it at all, but he has to deliver his new weapon. Before reaching Scadet, they must go through the closest city. It seems like a normal city, but there are tons of soldiers here. Our heroes determine that the Scuderian army is using this place to reorganize their troops. Just then, a group of knights line up, and Vaughn is shocked to see his father for the first time since he left. Marquise simply says that he heard that Vaughn became a baron and defeated a dragon. Vaughn doesn't want to make a big deal out of it, so he says that it was only a forest dragon. This has the opposite effect, as the knights gasp in amazement. A forest dragon is no joke, and Marquise demands to know how Vaughn did it. Even he can't defeat a dragon of that class on his own, and he would have to mobilize the full force of his knights just to face one. Vaughn simply explains that he defeated it with the ballistae, but this is even more unbelievable. Just then Panamera arrives, and she explains that the king is waiting for Vaughn. Vaughn has impressed him so much already, so Dino's excited to see what Vaughn has prepared this time. Panamera apologizes for interrupting Vaughn's family reunion, but Marquise assures her that she isn't. They have to go, but Vaughn says that he can show Marquise his weapons afterward. Panamera says that they can show the ballistae right now, but Vaughn explains that he has brought a new weapon. Panamera is ready to buy some of them as well, so Vaughn says that they can talk prices later. They go to meet with Dino, and Vaughn is amazed by the royal guards. He can tell that they're really powerful, and Panamera confirms it. Dino values military accomplishments, so his guards reflect that. They're all superb warriors, but Panamera says that Vaughn might be able to beat him with all the weapons he has. The guards don't like this insult, and Vaughn wishes that she wouldn't put him in these situations. Inside, Dino explains what their strategy will be moving forward. They will gather Scuderia's elites together and retake the fortress city of Scadet. At the table, Vaughn notices Count Ferdinando, who is also Art's father. Dino turns to Aperta and asks him if there's anything they should be wary of for the upcoming battle. Aperta says that there is, as Yeleneta's army has laid siege to Scadet many times over the years. However, this time, they took it over in the blink of an eye. The main reasons for this are the wyverns and the strange new weapons they're using. They will have to do something about them, but it won't be so easy. They use the wyverns to attack from above, and it's proving difficult to bring them down. Marquise experienced this new weapon firsthand, so Ferdinando wonders what it was like. Marquise reveals that the black bombs delivered tremendous force, and it decimated his army. Aperta wonders if Vaughn has come up with a strategy, so Vaughn explains his plan. He points out that they need to take down the wyverns before they have a chance to use the black balls. The counts think that his suggestion is ridiculous, and they say that it's just drivel coming from a child. They think it's just wishful thinking, but Dino believes that Vaughn might be able to do it. He has learned to trust Vaughn, so he would like for Vaughn to be on the front lines of their operation to retake Scadet. Vaughn shocks everyone though when he explains that he has no intentions of going to the front lines. The others can't believe that this kid is talking back to the king, but Dino isn't insulted at all. Instead, he's just confused because Vaughn could earn tons of glory by going to the front lines. Vaughn already knows this, but he would rather act in a support capacity. Dino can only wonder why, so Vaughn simply explains that it's because he doesn't want to get hurt. The nobles call him selfish, and they wonder what kind of upbringing he had at the house of Marquise. Marquise refuses to let his name be tarnished, so he tells Vaughn that he's out of line. He reminds Vaughn that he's only the lord of a small village, so he should know his place. Vaughn calmly explains that he knows his place more than anyone. He points out that none of the higher nobles knows what it's like to be a lord, earnestly defending such a small village. Dino really believes in Vaughn, so he tells everyone to calm down so Vaughn can explain. Vaughn goes on to say that he was made the lord of a tiny village that could easily be wiped out. He was accompanied by fine allies, but he received no support from his family. Despite that, he worked hard to greatly develop his land. Even so, the village is still small, and it would be destroyed if Yeleneta Kingdom attacked while he was gone. The others wonder if Yeleneta would even attack such a small village, but there have already been signs. Aperta explains that Yeleneta actually sent a reconnaissance force to take over the village. Yeleneta is serious about crushing the nation this time, so they will likely conquer all the other domains on their borders. Vaughn agrees with this assessment and points out that it would be far too easy for them to burn down his village. All the nobles become really concerned as they realize that their own cities are also in danger. Vaughn finishes his explanation by saying that he just wants to protect the village that he built together with his people. He can't allow himself to get injured, which is why he can't go to the front lines. The others accept his explanation, but they can't help but notice one thing. Vaughn is speaking as if he could counter the Yeleneta army himself if he were at his village. Vaughn once again shocks everyone as he says that he believes he can. They say it would be impossible because Yeleneta is using wyverns and those black balls. Vaughn explains that none of that will be a problem. Vaughn turns to Dino and says that he plans to do much more than just support from the rear. In return for allowing him to do so, Vaughn reveals that he will prepare his new crossbows and catapults. Dino's relieved to hear this, so Vaughn says that it's time for him to go make his new weapons. Marquise becomes infuriated as he can't believe what Vaughn just said. Vaughn is just going to start making them right now, so Marquise determines that Vaughn doesn't understand the situation. He says that they're in a race against time, but Vaughn says that he will just have to show him. Vaughn then amazes every noble there as he uses his power to create a couple of weapons in a matter of seconds. The nobles don't even know what to make of this because they can't understand how these giant weapons could be made so fast. Vaughn wonders what Marquise thinks, but Marquise is not impressed. He is sure that these weapons are just for show and they probably aren't effective at all. Marquise isn't interested in seeing any more, so he leaves to prepare his army. Aperta is impressed with Vaughn's new weapon, and he compliments Vaughn for amazing them once again. Vaughn explains that these catapults are capable of launching specially made shuriken to down wyvern. Dino wonders if they can win with these, but Vaughn can't guarantee it. However, unless the army surpasses his predictions, Vaughn thinks that they have a good chance of victory. Dino says that he's counting on Vaughn, and he tells the other nobles to prepare their armies. Just then, the girls arrive to pick up Vaughn. Art sees her father for the first time in a while, and she can't help but think about how poorly she was treated by her mother. Her mother blamed her for how depressed she was, but Art still wonders how she's doing. Count Ferdinando explains that her mother's doing fine. He has to go prepare his army, so he tells Art that they can talk later. After he leaves, Vaughn can tell that Art is upset. She will need to rest, so he tells Till to stay with her. Vaughn then goes to speak with his group of warriors. He asks Kamson if he can entrust him with their artillery squad, and Kamson says that he can. Vaughn's weapons are stronger than anyone else's, and Kamson is eager to prove that to everyone. As for Dee and the Chivalric Order, they will defend Kamson's squad. Ortho says that the adventurers will help as well, and Panamera says that it's finally time for the decisive battle. Yeleneta used strange new weapons to easily take down the impregnable fortress city of Scadet. Now Vaughn is using his new weapons to fight back. This makes it clear to Panamera that the age of battles being decided by elemental mages is at its end. Dee wonders if Yeleneta possesses the greatest military might in the nation right now, but Panamera isn't so sure. They are extremely powerful, but she wonders if the most powerful is Vaughn and his many weapons. A while later, Marquise declares that it's time to commence the operation to retake Scadet. He sends his knights into attack, and Vaughn speaks to his group. He announces that their top goal in this operation is to defeat the Wyverns. As they charge in, Ortho tells Pluriel and Zara to act as a mobile unit and support their ranks wherever needed. Dee tells his men that their role is to defend the artillery. The Yeleneta commander watches their approach, and he can see what they're planning. He suspects that they're going to split up and destroy the ramparts. He won't let them, so he tells his archer to crush them. Dee instructs his men to use their shield, and the commander is shocked when they block his attack. Vaughn says that he made these shields hastily, but he's glad to see that they worked pretty well. The commander tells his mages to attack next, and Dee's knights try to block that as well. The commander is pleased to see that the attack is working, and the knights realize that the shields won't hold much longer. The commander laughs like a maniac as he says that no shield can withstand the assault of Yeleneta's army. Just then he's shocked as something attacks the front gate. He can only wonder where the attack came from, and he realizes that the attackers had a detached force. Marquise instructs them to attack the front gate, so their mages use their powers. Panamera and Mercia are among them, and they demonstrate their most powerful spells. The commander is horrified as he realizes that this was their plan from the start. Marquise and Ferdinando join in on the attack, and the combined power of all the mages destroys the front gate. Marquise instructs everyone to charge in, and the commander tells his army to stop them. The two forces clash immediately, and Dee's knights can tell that Yeleneta's army is filled with elite warriors. They are outnumbered, and they can tell that this is really bad for them. Luckily, Panamera rushes in to help them get the advantage, and Dee tells his men not to waste this opportunity. The battle rages on, and the adventurers join in to give our heroes the advantage. The adventurers really help turn the tide of battle, so Marquise wonders if they're Vaughn's people. Ortho reveals that they are, and Marquise still can't believe it. The Yeleneta commander didn't think that this battle would be this much of a struggle, so he tells his subordinate that it's time to use their weapon. He calls on the Wyverns, and he says that the battle will now end. He instructs them to drop their bombs, but Vaughn is ready. Vaughn tells Kamsen to get ready, so Kamsen prepares the catapults to be fired. Kamsen unleashes the attack, and the exploding shuriken successfully bring down the Wyverns. Things are going just as Vaughn planned, but there's a problem. One Wyvern managed to survive, and it's really dangerous. This thing is huge, and it's unaffected by the attack from Ortho and Zara. Their only goal, however, was to pin it down, so Kamsen could follow it up with an attack. Kamsen tells his men to fire the ballistae, and this attack does immense damage. This gives Panamera the perfect opportunity, so she tells everyone to leave it to her. She uses one of her powerful spells and covers the beast in flames. The Wyvern is no match for all these attacks, and Dee finishes it by chopping off its head. The Wyverns have been destroyed, so everyone rejoices. Ferdinando's in complete shock because he had no idea that Vaughn's power would be this great. The Yeleneta commander is ready to run, but he's found by the adventurers. Afterwards, Mercia wonders if Marquise is really going to leave without seeing Vaughn. Marquise doesn't know what to say, but he's starting to wonder if his beliefs were wrong. Inside, Dee says that all the glory of this victory goes to Vaughn. Vaughn is humble as always, as he points out that he only issued commands from the rear. The adventurers bring the Yeleneta commander, as he might have information for them. Panamera questions him and demands to know what their goal was. Our heroes learn that the Yeleneta Kingdom's plan was a three-pronged attack. Seatao and Scadet were two of those prongs, and the last one in their plan is Ferdinando County. Art is horrified to hear this, because that's where she's from. Art returns home with the others, and they're horrified to see that her home is being attacked. Yeleneta has been attacking for some time now, and Ferdinando County is in really bad shape. It's about to fall, and Art can only cry out to her mother. A while earlier, we see that Art told Vaughn that she wanted to go back home. Vaughn insisted on going with her, but Art refused. She didn't want to rely on Vaughn for everything, especially because this was a family matter. Vaughn had a hard time understanding, but eventually he figured it out. He is the lord of a small village, and if someone like him rescued Ferdinando County, it would look bad for Ferdinando. Fortunato would gain a bad reputation, and there's a chance that he would even lose his land. Vaughn agreed to stay back, but only if he could send the adventurers with Art. Art accepted this, and the adventurers promised to take care of Vaughn's future wife. Back to the present, Art rushes to check on her family. Unfortunately, she can only watch in horror as the wyverns drop their bombs on her city. Ortho stops her and says that if they join the battle now, they might be able to turn the tide. He wants permission to take command of their squad, but Art says that he can't. She knows what will happen if he does, and explains that it must be someone from House Fortunato who drives out the Alaneta army. Ortho wonders how she could possibly fight the giant army, and Art isn't even sure. In the castle, Art's sister Mary fears the worst. However, her mother named Sharon tells her not to worry. In the worst case scenario, she will make sure that it looks like Mary took her own life at the very end. It's a dark outcome, but she says that later generations must see that the eldest daughter ended her life cleanly, like a noble should. This isn't comforting at all, and Mary begins to cry. Sharon doesn't console her, as she can only think of Art. Outside, the Alaneta commander is confident that victory will be theirs. They prepare to conquer, but something knocks one of their wyverns out of the air. A silver knight is attacking them, but they have no clue who it is. It turns out to be Art's marionette, who's wiping out other giant monsters. Art demonstrates her masterful control, and the soldiers are in shock. The knight took out a flock of wyvern, but that should be impossible. The soldiers finally feel a bit of fear, as the Fortunato flag has been spotted in the distance. They decide to target the group that has appeared on the hill, and they will use their full might. They charge at the hill, and the adventurers say that they saw this coming. Art figured it wouldn't be easy like when Vaughn leads the charge, because she doesn't have enough battle experience. Art is so nervous that her hands are shaking, but she knows that she has to do her best. She asks Ortho to trust her, and she requests for the others to lend her their strength. She needs help saving her homeland, so the others are ready to hear her plan. Art simply declares that she's going to the front lines, and she puts Uno in automatic attack mode. Uno slices through the army, and the soldiers can only wonder how the knight is so insanely strong. Ortho says that they're charging in as well, and they join the battle. Ortho absolutely overwhelms his opponents as he uses his giant blade to slice them to pieces. Zara is just as forceful as he takes out a group himself. Pluriel uses her magic, and she's able to freeze the opponent in place. Uno rushes in to protect Zara when he's in danger, but she loses her arm in the process. This only terrifies the soldiers even more because the knight doesn't even skip a beat. Even missing one arm, Uno completely dominates the soldiers. Zara is grateful for his life being saved, so he thanks Art and her marionette magic. The battle rages on, and the other wild adventurers join in. Art's group does manage to turn the tide of battle as they have gained control of this area of the city. The fight isn't over, however, as a giant army of wyvern has appeared. The adventurers are terrified because they had no idea that the enemy had so many of them. There are at least 100 wyvern here, and they stretch as far as the eye can see. The army leader called these reinforcements, and he tells the wyvern to aim for the knight. Uno is severely outnumbered, and it's not looking good. Just then, everyone is shocked as another one of Art's marionettes appears. The others can't believe their eyes because they had no idea that Art could control two at once. Art is doing her best, but her mana won't last long while controlling two of them. The enemy senses that something is wrong, so the commander tells the wyvern to attack at full force. Zara fears that things are going to get bad because there are just far too many monsters. Art doesn't even hesitate for a second, and she sends in her marionettes. As she battles, Art thinks about how she's always felt like a failure. She was born a noble, but her aptitude was for marionette magic. It's a type of magic that is hated by everyone. Art began to hate her own magic, so she swore that she would never use it in front of others ever again. However, that is when she met Vaughn, and he taught her how to be more confident. Art now battles without holding back, and the others can only watch in amazement. Her power is incredible, and she has taken down more than half of the wyverns in the blink of an eye. The enemy leader demands for the knights to be crushed, but Art isn't done. She vows to save those that are precious to her with this magic of hers. Art crushes a few more of the enemies, and there's only one left. She makes quick work of it as well, and the enemy leader can only think about how this should be impossible. Yalaneta's army doesn't stand a chance, so they run for their lives. Ortho declares victory, so everyone celebrates. Art looks at her marionettes, and she thinks about how far she's come. She knows that they were able to win thanks to these dolls that Vaughn gave her. She apologizes to Uno for making her fight until she was battered and bruised. She is truly grateful to her knights because they helped her save her home. In the castle, Sharon can only wonder who came to save them. Just then Ferdinando arrives, and the girls ask who the reinforcements were. Ferdinando isn't sure, but what he does know is that the enemy was driven away by just 2 marionettes. The other thing is that a young girl with white hair was leading the charge. Sharon is in disbelief because she knows what this means. She struggles with the truth because it's horribly ironic. They drove Art away because they thought she was powerless, but in the end she was the one that saved them. They treated her so poorly, so Sharon can only cry with regret. Outside, the adventurers are surprised as Art has decided not to return home. She just saved everyone, and her parents are right there. Art is sure about her decision, as she feels that she would only cause them trouble if she went to see them. The adventurers are sure that everyone would be overjoyed if they knew that Art was the one controlling the marionettes. Art says that she doesn't believe that because her mother always hated her marionette magic. She's ready to return to her real home where Vaughn is waiting for them. When they return, Vaughn wonders if Art is okay. Something seems wrong, and Art says that she's no good. She couldn't issue commands to everyone with confidence the same way Vaughn does. She is ashamed of herself, but Vaughn assures her that she's fine. If anything, he can't understand why she's lacking confidence, especially after what she just did. Vaughn brightens the mood as always, as he says that it's incredible how she moves her marionettes so freely. Art still struggles to accept this, but Vaughn knows just what to say. He points out that Panamera said it perfectly when she couldn't recognize Art as the same girl that she brought from the county. Art says that he's just being nice, so Vaughn becomes more direct. He tells her that she did very well, and Art begins to cry as she finally accepts the compliment. Vaughn then welcomes her home, and she thanks our hero. Sometime later, Vaughn amazes everyone once again as he has created new shops and a new inn in the center of town. Art can't believe how beautiful they are, and Vaughn says that he wants all the villagers to enjoy a pleasant life. Vaughn then thinks about how he was worried about living here when he first arrived. However, things have completely changed since then. His friends agree with him, and they point out how much the village has grown. The once impoverished place has transformed into a lovely village. The adventurers are enjoying themselves, and the twins are thriving with their business. This village now has all types of ages, races, and personality types. Everyone gets along oddly well, and they're all having fun. As they have a party, everyone is amazed by how much Panamera can drink. Vaughn then thinks about how he was born a noble, but his aptitude for production magic got him kicked out of his home by his father. Then he was sent to become the lord of a remote village. However, it was thanks to this that he met many friends, and he was able to develop the village. Vaughn thought he had lost his home at first, but he found himself enjoying his new life. Before he knew it, this village became precious to him, and now he will do anything to protect it. Vaughn thanks everyone, but his moment is interrupted by Esparta. It's time for Vaughn to study, and Esparta won't let him slack off. Dee won't let him rest either, as he says that he will train Vaughn to become the greatest swordsman. Esparta wants Vaughn to become the greatest scholar, so their feud continues. Vaughn says that he doesn't want to be either, so he runs off. Everyone then cheers for our hero, as they tell him to run as fast as he can. Vaughn runs through the village, and thinks about all the amazing memories he has now. At the end of his run, Vaughn declares that he will continue making leisurely progress towards a fun place for everyone to live in. Thanks for watching my recap of the first season of this anime. Make sure to like the video.